little brother called me a slave for working a 9 to 5. My parents said I was a loss-making deal because I chose journalism over science. So when his entire tech empire came crashing down in a single morning, I just sipped my coffee and watched. Okay, so here's the deal. My younger brother built this flashy tech company that made him rich practically overnight, and my whole family worshipped the ground he walked on while treating me like the family disappointment. What none of them knew was that my boring loser journalism job would hand me the exact assignment that would unravel everything he'd built, and I didn't even have to break a sweat doing it. Let me introduce everyone. I'm 25 female newspaper researcher. My brother is Jay, 22, self-proclaimed tech genius. My dad, Richard, and my mom, Sunita, are both science professors who basically turned parenting into a performance review. And then there's Margaret, my senior editor, who unknowingly changed everything with one routine assignment. Growing up in the household of 2 science professors sounds impressive, until you realize that every dinner conversation was a peer review and every report card was a grant application. Richard and Sunita didn't ask how your day was. They asked what you'd accomplished. I was a good student. Not extraordinary. Not the kind of kid who made professors gasp. I read constantly, wrote obsessively, and had this quiet, stubborn love for stories for pulling threads until the whole fabric came undone. When I told my parents I wanted to study journalism, my mother's face did this thing where it went completely still, like I'd announced a terminal diagnosis. Journalism, Richard, repeated the word flattening in his mouth. You want to write Times articles, asterisk. I was 18. I remember my hands shaking under the table. Jay was 15 then, already coding apps in his bedroom, already being paraded around at faculty dinners like a show pony. My son Richard would say, hand on Jay's shoulder, chest expanding. He's going to change the world. Then he'd glance at me and the silence said everything. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was architectural. Jay got a new laptop every year. I got lectures about ROI on my tuition. Jay's achievements were framed and mounted in the hallway. My first published article, a real actual byline in a real actual newspaper, sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before Sunita used it as a coaster for her chai. I moved out at 22. Got a researcher position at a mid-sized newspaper. The pay was modest, the hours were long, and the work was meticulous. Cross-referencing databases, verifying sources, building the scaffolding that held investigative pieces together. I loved it the way you love something that loves you back quietly. Jay, meanwhile, exploded. At 20, he launched a tech company. At 21, he had an office with exposed brick and a cappuccino machine that cost more than my car. He posted Instagram stories from rooftop bars, leased a BMW, moved into a sleek downtown apartment with his business partner. The details were always vague: tech solutions, digital infrastructure, disrupting legacy systems, but the money was loud and specific. My parents lost their minds with pride. Jay closed another round of funding, Sunita would tell me on our bi-weekly calls, her voice humming. 300,000. Can you imagine? I could imagine. I just couldn't verify. The comments started small. Jay calling 9 to 5 workers wage slaves at Thanksgiving. Richard nodding along like it was philosophy. Then, they got sharper. Jay started texting me directly screenshots of his bank balance with laughing emojis, links to articles about dying newspapers with captions like "Times your industry, LOL, asterisk." I stopped responding. He escalated. Then came the ambush. It was a Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift, my eyes burning from screen fatigue when I heard knocking. Not polite knocking. The kind that says, "Times we've been discussing you in the car." Asterisk. Richard and Sunita stood in my doorway. My mother was holding a Tupperware of Dal, which was her way of disguising an intervention as care. "We need to talk about your future," Richard said, walking past me without being invited in. They sat on my couch times my times couch and times my times apartment that times I times paid for, and told me I needed to quit my job. "Just call Jay," Sunita said, her hands clasped like she was praying. "He's hiring. He'll find something for you." Something times real asterisks. My throat closed. My job is real. "Sweetheart, you're 25, and you make less than his intern." She said it gently, which made it worse. Richard pulled out his phone. I'll call him now. We'll sort this out. Dad, I don't want... He was already dialing. Speakerphone. Jay's voice filled my living room bright and careless. What's up? Jay Beta, your sister needs guidance. We think she should come work with. Jay laughed. Not a chuckle. A full theatrical laugh. Work with times, me times, doing what she can't code, she can't sell. She writes little articles nobody reads. My fingernails dug into my palm so hard I felt skin break. Jay, I started. Sis, no offense, but you're a loser. I'm not running a charity. I looked at my parents. Waiting. Waiting for the correction, the pushback, the basic parental reflex of times don't talk to your sister like that. Asterisk. Richard cleared his throat. He has a point. You're a loss-making deal right now. We invested in your education, and I stopped hearing words. Just sounds. My mother nodding. My father's mouth moving. Jay's tinny voice still going on, the speakers, something about hustle and mindset. They left an hour later. The doll sat untouched on my counter. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. 3 weeks later, Margaret dropped a folder on my desk. New assignment. I'm covering a piece on the growing fraudulent tech companies in the U.S. Their operating models, how they scale, how they collapse. I need you to build me the research backbone. She gave me a brief rundown. There are many ways these fraudulent companies operate. The easiest fraud is calling customers, posing as bank officials, extracting credit card details, CVV numbers, draining accounts dry. Then there's the antivirus scam someone calls. Posing as a software executive gains trust by pointing out simple issues like internet lag or storage problems. Creates urgency about malicious attacks. Then installs remote access. Tools. There were dozens of variations, all following the same architecture: fake legitimacy, manufactured urgency, rapid extraction. I spent the first week building spreadsheets, revenue models, growth patterns, red flags, and then my hands went still on the keyboard. The growth trajectory I was mapping, the impossible client acquisition rates, the shell company registrations, the offshore payment routing. I'd seen this exact pattern before on Jay's Instagram stories. In his vague explanations, in the numbers that never quite added up. I pulled up his company's public filings. My pulse was hammering so loud I could hear it in my teeth. Every single data point matched. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I sat cross-legged on my bed with my laptop burning, my thighs toggling between Jay's company filings and the fraud architecture models Margaret had outlined. Shell registrations in Delaware. Payment routing through 2 intermediary LLCs before hitting an offshore account. Client acquisition numbers that would require a sales team of 200 run by a company with 11 listed employees. Jay had 11 listed employees. My journalist brain did what it was trained to do. It pulled the thread. I spent 2 weeks verifying. Quietly, methodically. The way you build scaffolding, one cross-reference at a time. I matched his company's registered addresses to known fraud operation hubs. I traced his clients through public records and found hollow entities, paper companies with no employees, no offices, no product. I found call center contracts buried in procurement databases. I found the antivirus scam playbook. The exact one Margaret had described. Someone calling, posing as a software executive. Gaining trust through simple computer complaints. Creating urgency about malicious attacks embedded in training, documents uploaded to a cloud server his company had failed to make. Private. Jay's exposed brick office wasn't disrupting legacy systems. It was running a fraud farm. And the BMW, the rooftop bars, the $300,000 in funding that made my mother's voice hum with pride, all of it was stolen. drained from bank accounts of people who picked up the phone and trusted the voice on the other end. I sat with this for 3 days. My hand shook every time I opened the folder. Not from fear, from something worse. The gravitational pull of what I was about to do and the absolute certainty that I was going to do it. I couldn't confront him. Jay was smart enough to have exit routes. I'd found flight itineraries in the cloud server, open-ended tickets to Dubai purchased 6 months ago. He and his business partner had a contingency. The moment anyone got close, they'd vanish. So I didn't get close. I got surgical. I called Sunita on a Saturday morning, my voice light and steady. I've been thinking about what you and Dad said. You're right. I need to try harder with Jay. I want to throw him a surprise birthday party at his apartment. Something small. Just family. The silence on the other end was so shocked it was almost funny. Really, Sunita whispered. Really. I'll handle everything. Jay's birthday was 11 days away. I used every one of them. I visited his apartment 3 days before the party, under the pretense of decorating. Jay wasn't home. His business partner let me in, barely looking up from his phone. I moved through the apartment with streamers and balloons, and while I taped gold foil letters to the living room wall, I placed 2 recording devices. One behind the mounted TV, one inside the decorative bowl on the kitchen island. Small, unobtrusive, the kind I'd seen in evidence lockers during a courthouse assignment 2 years ago. The party was on a Friday. I made a cake. I smiled. I handed Jay a wrapped gift, a leather notebook, because the irony pleased me, and watched him set it aside without opening it. You didn't have to do all this, Jay said, leaning against his kitchen island 2 inches from the second recorder. He was being magnanimous. Generous with his attention the way people are when they've already decided you're beneath them. I wanted to, I said. Richard clapped Jay on the back. See, family comes together. I left at 10. Jay's business partner arrived at 10:30. I know because the recorder caught the door. It also caught everything else. 3 hours of conversation? Revenue breakdowns? Client lists? The words burn the Delaware filings and move the Dubai flight up to March? Jay's voice clear as glass, walking his partner through which accounts to drain before the quarter closed. Names. Numbers. Routing codes. I listened to the recordings in my car at 2 in the morning, parked outside my apartment building, and my hands were so steady it scared me. I didn't write the article. That wasn't my role. I compiled everything, the financial records, the shell company traces, the cloud server documents, the recordings into a single airtight package, and sent it to the IT cell's cybercrime division through their anonymous tip line. No name, no return address, just evidence structured the way I'd been trained to structure research, clean-sourced, and irrefutable. The raid happened on a Tuesday, 7 a.m. I know because Sunita called me at 7:23 screaming so hard the words collapsed into each other. They took Jay Police, his office times, everything, asterisk. I sat on my bed and said, "Oh my God," and my voice sounded exactly right. Jay's accounts were frozen by noon. His property was seized by 3. His passport was confiscated before he could reach the airport. The BMW was towed from the impound lot where it had been parked, since officers pulled him out of it in handcuffs. The genius empire crumbled in a single morning. Within a week, Jay was back in my parents' house. The exposed brick apartment was gone. The cappuccino machine was evidence. He sat in his childhood bedroom while lawyers filed motions and Richard paced the hallway gray-faced, calling everyone he knew. Someone on the inside did this, Jay said at dinner. I heard it through Sunita's speakerphone, which she'd accidentally left connected when she called to tell me the latest. Someone tipped them off. Someone who had access. Who would do that? Richard muttered. Someone jealous, Jay said. Someone who couldn't stand watching me win. Sunita called me the next day. You know Jay's in trouble. I heard. The family needs to come together, not fall apart. Not be times jealous, asterisk. I held the phone away from my face and breathed. I'm not jealous, Mom. I know, sweetheart. I'm just saying. She wasn't just saying. She was accusing. Even now, even with her son's mugshot in a police database, the shrapnel was aimed at me. I let it land. I'd learned to let things land. Margaret called me into her office on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the raid. Your research on the fraud piece was exceptional. Best structural work I've seen in 5 years. She leaned back in her chair. We're giving you a column. Your own byline. Investigative focus. My throat tightened. Are you serious? You earned it. Every cross-reference, every source chain, that's not researcher work anymore. That's journalist work. I walked out of her office and stood in the hallway for a full minute, my back against the wall, my eyes burning. That evening, I drove past my parents' house. Jay's BMW was gone, obviously. Richard's car sat in the driveway next to Sunita's. The hallway light was on the one that illuminated Jay's framed achievements. I kept driving. My phone buzzed. A text from a cousin I hadn't heard from in 2 years. Times heard about your new column. Always knew you'd make it. Asterisk. I almost laughed. The loser hadn't needed to code a single line. Hadn't needed to hustle or disrupt or scale. She just needed to do her job, slowly, carefully. The way you pull a thread until the whole fabric comes undone. And it did. There's something uniquely soul-crushing about watching someone steal the thing you built with your own hands, then smile at you while the room applauds them for it. So here's my question. What would you do if the person who took everything from you, your promotion, your projects, your name on your own work, couldn't even explain what they stole? Because that's exactly how I destroyed him. I'm Jake 28, the kind of guy who pours art into everything he touches, sculptures, music, even corporate presentation. Derek is 31, my new boss, a man whose entire career is built on other people's talent, and a smile that could sell you your own shoes. And Sarah, she's 26, my colleague, quietly furious and about to become the best co-conspirator I've ever had. The promotion was supposed to be mine. I don't say that with entitlement. I say it with the quiet certainty of a man who spent 14 months redesigning our entire client onboarding workflow, who stayed until midnight, building interactive presentation decks that made the VP of Operations literally stand up, clap, who sculpted a proposal so clean and elegant it became the template 3 departments now use. I say it because the hiring panel told me to my face that I was the front runner. Then Derek walked into the final interview with a portfolio I'd never seen him build and a smile that could sell you your own shoes twice. Senior Manager of Innovation. They gave him the title on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he'd sent a company-wide email announcing a team celebration at an upscale bar downtown. The email was warm, generous, full of exclamation points. The fine print was less festive. Each team member was expected to contribute $40 toward the venue and catering for his promotion party that we were throwing for him with our money. I remember Sarah reading the email at her desk, her jaw doing this slow tightening thing like she was physically fighting back words. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything. We both paid. That was the first lesson in Derek's economy. Everything flows upward. The second lesson came fast. Within 2 weeks, Derek restructured our workload in ways that looked strategic on paper but felt surgical in practice. My project timelines doubled. Deadlines compressed. I went from leaving at 6 to leaving at 9, then 10, then not leaving at all some nights. My sculpting table at home gathered dust. My guitar case stayed closed so long the latches started to stick. I told myself it was temporary. New manager, new expectations. I'd adjust. But here's what I started noticing. The overtime wasn't distributed evenly. 3 of us carried 80% of the load while the rest of the team coasted. And the 3 of us, we were the ones who'd been vocally supportive of my promotion. Coincidence is a word people use when they don't want to see the pattern. I know a lot of you would have suggested that I switch companies. I know it's an easier fix. But the thing is, I had worked for 5 years in this company and I didn't want to leave it just because some jerk felt entitled to exploit me. I wanted to stay and prove my mettle, otherwise it would be just like running away from the situation. I didn't want to give him that sense of satisfaction. Call it ego or whatever, but this is how it is. Why is it that we don't want to leave a toxic work environment? Do we want the last laugh? What point are we trying to make? Why do we feel that we're running away from something and not running to something better? I didn't have answers then. I just had stubbornness and a clenched jaw. Then came the report incident, and stubbornness stopped being enough. Sarah had compiled a quarterly analytics report, thorough, accurate, cross-referenced. She'd sent it to Derek for review before the department meeting. What she didn't know was that Derek edited the file after she submitted it. Changed 3 key data points. Small changes, but enough to make the projections look incoherent when the director started asking questions. Sarah stood in that conference room while the director frowned at her numbers. Her voice stayed steady, but I could see her hands trembling against the table edge, fingertips white. These projections don't align with Q2 actuals, the director said. They should, Sarah started. I pulled directly from... I flagged concerns about this report last week, Derek interrupted, leaning back in his chair with his performative reluctance. Like it pained him to say it. I should have followed up more closely. That's on me as her manager. The room heard accountability. I heard a man throwing someone under a bus while pretending to jump in front of it. Sarah's performance review that quarter included a note about attention to detail. She found out later. She came to my desk, sat down, and said nothing for a full minute. Then very quietly, he changed the file, Jake. I know. I have the original version. Save it. Save everything from now on. That was the moment Sarah stopped being my colleague and became something else entirely. Something sharper. But Derek wasn't done with me. Not even close. Because what came next was worse than overtime, worse than humiliation. It was hope. He assigned me the Meridian Project, a full-scale innovation proposal for our biggest client. Creative direction, visual design, strategic narrative. It was everything I was built for. For 3 months, I poured myself into it. I sculpted that project the way I sculpt clay, with patience, with obsession, with my fingerprints pressed into every surface. Late nights returned, but this time I didn't mind. I was creating again. The presentation was scheduled for a Friday. I prepared 46 slides. I rehearsed until the transitions lived in my muscle memory. Thursday evening, Derek called me into his office. Change of plans, he said, not looking up from his laptop. I'll be presenting Meridian tomorrow. Director wants senior leadership front and center on this one. My chest went hollow. It's my project. It's the company's project, Jake. He finally looked at me, that smile. I'll make sure to mention the team's contributions. He didn't. I sat in that room the next morning and watched Derek present my work, my architecture, my language, my creative vision to a room full of executives. My name appeared nowhere. Not on the deck. Not in his remarks. Not even in the follow-up email. The room applauded. Derek shook the director's hand. And something inside me finished dying and started building something new. That night, Sarah met me in the parking garage. She leaned against her car, arms crossed, eyes like flint. "I have an idea," she said. "But you're going to have to trust me." I looked at her. She looked at me. "Derek's presenting the Helios proposal to the director next month," she continued. "What if we make sure that this time, when he steals the work..." She paused. A slow, dangerous smile. "He steals exactly what we want him to." We spent 3 weeks building Helios. Or rather, we spent 3 weeks building 2 versions of Helios. The real version was elegant, a sustainability integration framework that would save the client $2.3 million annually. I designed it with the same obsessive precision I bring to everything. Every data point verified. Every projection stress tested. Every slide crafted like a sculpture. Each element load-bearing. The decoy version looked identical. Same formatting, same visual language, same confident tone. But Sarah and I had seeded it with errors, subtle ones, the kind that wouldn't jump out on a casual read but would collapse under the slightest interrogation. Revenue projections built on a formula that double-counted Q3 returns. A market analysis that cited a study which didn't exist. Implementation timelines that contradicted the budget allocations 3 slides later. The trap wasn't the errors, the trap was the depth. Derek never went deeper than surface level on anything he stole. He memorized talking points, not architecture. He learned the times what times, but never the times why asterisk. We were betting his entire career on that pattern holding. Sarah left the decoy file in the shared project folder on a Tuesday, time-stamped and version logged. The real version lived on an encrypted drive in my apartment next to my dusty sculpting table. Wednesday morning, the file's access log showed a download at 11:47 p.m. Derek's credentials. Sarah pinged me one word. Times. Hooked. Asterisk. The presentation was scheduled for the following Friday. Director Morrison, 2 VPs, and a client liaison. High stakes. Exactly the kind of stage Derek couldn't resist. Thursday afternoon, Derek called me into his office. Same posture, same laptop staring performance, same script. "I'll be handling the Helios presentation tomorrow. Director wants. Senior leadership front and center," I finished. "Got it." He looked up, surprised. I think he expected resistance. Instead, I nodded and walked out. My hands were steady, my pulse was not. That night I rehearsed until 2 a.m. Not the decoy. The real thing. Friday. Conference room B, 10th floor. The long table, the projection screen, the filtered water nobody ever drinks. I sat in the second row with Sarah beside me. She had a manila folder in her lap, closed, unmarked. Her fingers rested on it like a pianist waiting for the downbeat. Derek opened strong. He always did, that was his gift, the performance. Confident posture, warm eye contact, the slight lean forward that said times I believe in this asterisk. He walked through the first 10 slides with the fluency of a man who'd built every pixel himself. Director Morrison nodded along. The VPs took notes. Then the questions started. "Walk me through the revenue model," Morrison said. Casual. Conversational. The way a man asks a question he already knows the answer to. Derek smiled. Absolutely. So as you can see on slide 14, the projected returns are based on... The Q3 figures, Morrison interrupted. They seem high. How are you accounting for the seasonal adjustment? A pause. Barely half a second, but I saw it, the micro-freeze behind Derek's eyes. The moment a man reaches for knowledge that isn't there. The seasonal adjustment is factored into the baseline projections, Derek said smoothly. Where? Show me. Derek clicked back to slide 11. He stared at it. The formula was right there and it was wrong, and he didn't know it was wrong because he'd never understood what right looked like. It's the baseline here, incorporates Derek. Morrison leaned forward. The implementation timeline on slide 22 allocates 4 months for phase 2, but your budget only funds 3. Which is correct? Silence. Derek's jaw worked. I watched his hand drift toward the laptop touchpad, scrolling, searching for an answer that the decoy would never give him. That's a formatting discrepancy, he tried. The actual? And the Whitfield study you cite on slide 18, Morrison continued, voice flat. My team couldn't locate it. Can you provide the source? The room had gone very still. The VPs had stopped writing. The client liaison was looking at her hands. Derek's face flushed from the collar upward, a slow red tide. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I stood up. Director Morrison, if I may. Every head turned. Derek's eyes found mine, and for the first time, I saw something behind the smile, the raw animal recognition of a man watching his own trap close. I connected my drive to the secondary display. The real Helios opened on screen, clean, correct mine. The Q3 revenue model uses a weighted seasonal adjustment detailed here. I walked them through. Every question Morrison had asked, I answered with the precision of someone who'd built the thing from the foundation up. I corrected every seeded error not by naming them as traps, but by simply presenting work so clearly mine that the contrast did the talking. Then I said the sentence I'd been carrying for months. I'd also like to note that a similar discrepancy occurred with the Meridian project presentation in March. The original project files with my metadata and version history are available for review. Sarah opened her manila folder, placed 3 documents on the table, time-stamped file logs, original report versions. A paper trail that stretched back 8 months. Morrison looked at the documents. Looked at Derek. Said nothing. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Derek Morrison said, "My office." Now, I know a lot of you suggested that I should have switched companies months ago. I know it's an easier fix. But the thing is, I worked 5 years in this company and I didn't want to leave it just because some jerk felt entitled to exploit me. I wanted to stay and prove my mettle. Call it ego or whatever, but this is how it is. The investigation took 2 weeks. Sarah filed her formal complaint about the falsified quarterly report, complete with her original file and Derek's edited version. 3 other colleagues came forward with their own stories, smaller thefts, quieter erasures, the same pattern wearing different masks. Derek's name disappeared from the employee portal on a Wednesday. No announcement, no farewell email, no explanation. He simply stopped existing in our systems the way a shadow disappears when you turn on the light. Our team now reports directly to Morrison. My name is on my projects. Sarah got her performance review amended. Last Tuesday, she sent me a message. Times, check your mail. Asterisk. A new set of sculpting tools. Professional grade. The card read Times, build something. Asterisk. Last night I opened my guitar case for the first time in 7 months. The latches stuck, then gave. The strings were dead, so I restrung them. Tuned each one by ear the way I learned as a kid, slowly listening for the moment the pitch stops fighting and settles into itself. I played for 2 hours. Nothing polished. Nothing performative. Just a man in his apartment making something that was entirely his own. The sculptor reclaims his craft. I protected my best friend from her own jealousy, for years hid my promotions, cropped my photos, downplayed every single win, and she repaid me by feeding my deepest secrets to a guy at my job so he could humiliate me at work. My lifelong best friend Richie spent years pretending to love me while slowly poisoning every corner of my life. And when she finally latched onto my cousin Darren and built an entire fake identity to trap him into marriage, I had to decide whether loyalty to her was worth watching my own family get destroyed. I chose the truth, and she has not stopped messaging me since. I'm 23 female, and I've known Richie since we were kids. Darren is my 28-year-old cousin who was ready to propose. Jill is the smug guy at my office who became Richie's little informant. And my mom is the only person who told me to stay calm, advice I eventually stopped taking. Richie and I grew up 3 houses apart on the same dead-end street. We shared a desk in 2nd grade, got our first periods the same summer, cried together the night her dad left. She was the person I called before I called my mom. That kind of history doesn't just disappear, it calcifies. It becomes a thing you protect at all costs, even when the cost is yourself. The crack started in college. We went to different schools. Mine was out of state, hers was local, and the distance did something to her I didn't fully understand until much later. Every time I'd call and mention a party, a road trip, a professor who liked my work, the line would go quiet for half a second too long before she'd say, "Must be nice." I learned to edit myself. I stopped mentioning the dean's list. I cropped group photos so she wouldn't see the restaurant backgrounds. When I landed a paid internship junior year, I told her it was just filing stuff. I thought I was being kind. I was building a cage. After graduation, I moved back home and got hired at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. Good salary, real benefits, the kind of job that makes your relatives nod with approval at Thanksgiving. Richie was working part-time at a retail store and taking online classes she kept dropping. I never brought up the gap. Not once. But social media doesn't care about your boundaries. A colleague tagged me in a photo from a team lunch at this upscale Italian place the company took us to after we closed a big account. I was in a blazer holding a glass of wine, laughing at something someone said off camera. It was nothing. It was everything. Richie's text came 40 minutes later. Times, wow, look at you living the corporate dream, LOL asterisk. I typed back something deflective, times it was just a work thing. The pasta was mid, honestly, times, but the energy had already shifted. The next time we hung out, she made a comment about my new bag. Then my nails. Then the way I talk different now, like you think you're better. Each one delivered with a smile, a little laugh, plausible deniability baked in. I absorbed it. I minimized. I told myself she was going through a hard time. Then Jill happened. Jill worked 2 cubicles down from me. He was the kind of guy who collected information the way other people collected sneakers, not because he needed it, but because having it made him feel powerful. He had this habit of leaning against your desk with his arms crossed, smirking like he already knew the punchline to a joke you hadn't heard yet. I didn't know he and Richie had connected online until the morning he sidled up to my desk and said loud enough for 3 people to hear, "So, I heard you have a thing for older guys." Like times, significantly times older. My face went hot. My hands went still on the keyboard. What? Nothing. He held up his palms, grinning. Just something I heard. I had told exactly one person that. One. And I told her at 16, lying on her bedroom floor, trusting her with the kind of confession you only make when you believe someone will guard it with their life. It got worse. A week later, Jill made a comment in the break room about experimenting in high school while looking directly at me. A drunken kiss at a party when I was 17, sloppy, meaningless. Something I'd whispered to Richie in the dark because I was confused and scared, and she was supposed to be safe. She'd given him everything. Every vulnerable, unguarded thing I'd ever handed her. I drove to her house that evening. Didn't call first. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I kept rehearsing what I'd say calm, measured the way my mom would want me to handle it. That lasted about 90 seconds after she opened the door. "You told Jill about Marcus, about the kiss with Tanya. Are you serious, Richie?" "Oh my God, here we go." No, here we go. He's saying this stuff at my time's job. Asterisk. People I work with every day. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your little corporate image. This isn't about image. These were time's secrets, times I trusted you. She laughed. Actually, laughed. You trust me, you've been hiding your whole life from me for years. The lunches, the promotions, acting like you're still regular when you're out here living some. I hid those things times for times you. That's when her face changed. Something behind her eyes locked shut. You hid them because you think I'm pathetic, she said. You've always thought that. She said that I was labeling her to be jealous and insecure. I realized it was useless talking to her, and she was not going to understand anything. Our friendship was dead, and there was no point in trying to fix it. I said this and raced out of her house. When I was leaving, I saw her mom sitting in the living room, and it was evident she'd been listening to our conversation. If not all of it, she must have heard us yelling at each other, yet she didn't intervene. Even when she saw me leaving her house angrily and in tears, she didn't tell me anything. I'm sure if this happened at my house, my mom would have intervened and tried to pacify the situation between us. I went to my mom after that and told her everything. She asked me if she could talk to Richie about it. I said no because I knew it wouldn't matter. Mom squeezed my hand and said, "Then let it die quietly, baby. Don't give her more ammunition." I listened. For 3 months I listened. And then Richie started dating Darren. My Darren. My cousin who just made senior analyst. My cousin who talked about wanting a wife and kids by 30. My cousin who called me one Sunday afternoon and said, "Hey, I need to ask you something about Richie, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My throat closed. Because I already knew what he was going to ask. Darren didn't ease into it. That wasn't his style. He was the kind of man who read contracts line by line and asked the questions nobody wanted to hear at family dinners. So when he called me that Sunday, he didn't circle, he landed. Richie told me she's never been with anyone. Like times anyone, asterisk. She said I'd be her first everything. And I want to believe her, but something's not sitting right. I was standing in my kitchen holding a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My reflection stared back at me from the microwave door mouth, tight eyes already calculating. "What made you ask me?" I said carefully. "Because you've known her since you were kids. And because last week she spent 45 minutes grilling me about my ex. Where she works, what she looks like, whether I still follow her on anything, and when I asked her the same kind of questions, she got offended. Said there was nothing to tell. That she'd been waiting for someone worth it." He paused. And then she cried. My jaw tightened. That was Richie's signature move, tears as a trapdoor. The moment you got too close to something real, she'd flood the room so you couldn't see the exit. "Darren, why does this matter to you? Like specifically, because I bought a ring last Tuesday." The mug slipped. I caught it against my hip tee sloshing over my fingers. I barely felt it. "You bought a Times ring, asterisk. I'm not playing around out here. I'm 28, I want what I want. But I'm not building a life on a lie. So I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's ugly. Asterisk, especially times if it's ugly." I sat down. The chair scraped against the tile, and the sound felt too loud for the decision I was making. My mom's voice floated through my head, "Times let it die quietly, don't give her more ammunition times," and for a moment I almost listened. Almost swallowed it the way I'd been swallowing things for Richie since we were 16. But this was Darren. This was family. And Richie wasn't just hiding a number or softening a timeline, she'd constructed an entire person who didn't exist, and she was selling that person to a man who'd already bought the ring. "She's lying," I said, "about all of it." The silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. I counted. "Tell me." So I did. I told him about Kyle from her job at the movie theater, the guy she dated for 8 months, sophomore year of high school. About the college boyfriend she'd moved in with for a semester before he caught her going through his phone and put her stuff on the porch. About the string of situationships she'd narrate to me over FaceTime during college, each one ending in a blocked number and a story where she was never the problem. And then I opened my Google Drive. I'd kept everything not out of malice, but because I was a digital hoarder and Richie used to send me screenshots of conversations the way other people send memes. Flirty texts she wanted me to decode. Photos from dates she wanted me to rate. Evidence of a full, messy human romantic history that she'd apparently decided to erase the moment she met a man with a senior analyst title and a savings account. I sent Darren 6 screenshots. 2 photos. One video she'd posted to a private story 2 years ago dancing in some guy's kitchen at 2 a.m. Captioned, "Times wifey material if he acts right, asterisk." He didn't say anything for a long time. "Then, I appreciate you. I mean that." He hung up. What happened next, I got in pieces from Darren from my aunt from the aftermath that rippled through family group chats for weeks. Darren went to her apartment that night. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply asked her to tell him again one more time that she'd never been with anyone. She did. She looked him in the eyes and repeated the lie like it was scripture. Then he told her what he knew. She broke. Not the performative crying she'd perfected, this was different. Gasping, hyperventilating, mascara-streaked, ugly crying while grabbing at his arm. He removed her hand. He took the ring box off her nightstand. She'd been keeping it there, showing it to people already. He asked for the phone he'd bought her. She said she needed to transfer her photos first. He said no. Took it out of her hand, factory reset it in front of her, and walked out. My phone started buzzing at 1147 that night. Text after text, each one more unhinged than the last. Asterisk. You ruined my life. Asterisk. Asterisk. You've always been jealous of me and you know it. Asterisk. Asterisk. I hope you're happy, you evil witch. Asterisk. Asterisk. Darren was the only good thing I had, and you took him because you can't stand to see me win. Asterisk. Asterisk. You're gonna die alone and you deserve it. Asterisk. I read every single one. I felt my pulse in my fingertips, my breath steady, my chest oddly still. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the familiar knot to tighten in my stomach, the one that had kept me editing photos and downplaying promotions and swallowing insults with a smile for years. It didn't come. For the first time, the absence of guilt didn't feel like numbness. It felt like the floor under my feet finally being solid. I didn't respond. Not to any of it. I blocked her number at 12:03 a.m., plugged in my phone, and went to sleep. The next morning, I posted about my promotion. Full photo blazer office, view the whole thing. No cropping, no filter, no apology. The caption was, "Simple times, hard work looks good on me." Asterisk. Richie had spent years making me small enough to stand next to. And I'd let her because I thought shrinking was the same as loving. It wasn't. It was just disappearing slowly enough that nobody noticed, least of all me. She's still out there, 3 houses down, on the same dead-end street. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work. I don't slow down. I don't look. The history between us didn't disappear, she's right about that. But it stopped being something I protect. Some cages you build with kindness. And some truths you tell not to destroy someone, but to finally stop destroying yourself. My family forgot I existed for 17 years. They didn't call when I had surgery. They didn't show up to a single birthday. But the moment they needed a free apartment, they tracked down my address in 3 days flat. So here's what happened. My biological mother abandoned me when I was 8, and I haven't heard from her side of the family since. Now her other daughter just got kicked out, and suddenly I'm getting bombarded by relatives I've never met demanding I open my door to a complete stranger. When I said no, they dropped her on my porch with a suitcase and tried to break into my house. I'm 25 female. My half-sister is Danielle, also 25. My biological mother is Renee. Her mother, the one orchestrating all of this, is Gloria. And my dad, the only one who actually raised me, is Keith. Let me give you the backstory so everything that comes next makes sense. Renee left when I was 8. Not left like she moved across town and sent birthday cards. Left like she packed a bag while I was at school, drove 6 hours south to be with Ray, the man she'd been seeing behind my dad's back, and didn't look back. Keith came home to an empty closet and a note on the kitchen counter. I didn't even get a note. For a while, I thought she was coming back. Kids do that. I'd set a place for her at dinner. Keith never removed it. He just quietly ate across from an empty chair until I stopped setting it myself. That took about 4 months. What I didn't know until years later was that Renee was already pregnant when she left. Danielle was born 7 months after Renee walked out of my life, which means she was conceived while Renee was still living under our roof, still tucking me in at night, still pretending. The math on that betrayal hits different when you're old enough to do it. Ray wanted nothing to do with me, made that clear. Keith tried to maintain contact with Renee's side for my sake, not his, and was told in no uncertain terms that I was Keith's responsibility now. Gloria said that. Those exact words. Keith's responsibility. Like I was a bill that got reassigned. So Keith raised me. Alone. He worked doubles at the plant, coached my softball team on 3 hours of sleep, learned how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials before YouTube tutorials were even good. That man sat in a tiny plastic chair at every parent-teacher conference, every recital, every ER visit. When I was 14 and needed surgery, a pretty serious one, I was in the hospital for 5 days. Not a single person from Renee's side called. Not one. Gloria lived 6 hours away. Too far, apparently, to pick up a phone. I grew up. I healed. I got a degree, got a decent job, saved aggressively, and by 24 I'd closed on a small house about 15 minutes from Keith. He actually moved to be closer to me, bought the place next door when it went on the market. That's the kind of father he is. We had dinner together most weeknights. I had a life that was quiet and mine and hard-won, and I protected it like the precious thing it was. Then, 3 Tuesdays ago, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. Is this... A shaky breath. Is this my sister? My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I knew. Somehow, immediately, I knew. Who is this? It's Danielle. Please don't hang up. Mom kicked me out. Ray won't answer his phone. I have nowhere to go, and Grandma Gloria said, How did you get this number? Gloria gave it to me. She said you'd understand because Mom did the same thing to... Stop. My hand was shaking. Not from sadness. From something hotter. Danielle, I don't know you. I know, but we're sisters and... I just need... We're not sisters. We share a woman who abandoned both of us. That's not the same thing. She started crying. Hard. And I sat there in my kitchen with my fork halfway to my mouth, leftover pasta going cold, listening to a stranger sob, and I felt, I want to be honest here, I felt nothing. Not cruelty. Not satisfaction. Just a vast, flat nothing like staring at a lake with no wind. 17 years of silence will do that. I told her no. Clearly. Firmly. I said I was sorry for her situation, but I couldn't help. I hung up. Within the hour, my phone became a war zone. Numbers I'd never seen. Area codes from 6 hours south. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people whose names I'd never heard texting me paragraphs. Asterisk. Family helps family. You know what it's like to be thrown away. How can you do this to your own blood? Asterisk. Then Gloria called. You listen to me, she said, and her voice had that particular tone. Righteous weaponized the voice of someone who has never once been told no by anyone who mattered. That girl is your sister, and she needs help. God is watching what you do right now. If Danielle needs help so badly, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected, one of you should help her. I don't know her. I don't know any of you either. We're 6 hours away. We can't just... 6 hours is too far to visit when I had surgery, but not too far to try and force me to do something. Silence. I blocked Gloria. I blocked Danielle. I blocked every unknown number that came through. I told Keith everything. He listened, jaw tight, then said 5 words. Don't let him in, baby. I thought it was over. 4 days later, I pulled onto my street after work and my headlights swept across my front porch. Someone was sitting on my steps. A suitcase beside her. A familiar car, Gloria's car, pulling away from the curb taillights, disappearing around the corner like a getaway vehicle. Danielle looked up and locked eyes with me through the windshield. My phone buzzed. Keith, from Next Door Times. Stay in the car. Do not get out. Call the police now. Asterisk. I called 911 with my engine still running and my doors locked. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The rest of me felt like it was vibrating at a frequency only dogs could hear, but my hands steady. Keith's porch light flicked on next door. I could see his silhouette in the window phone to his ear, watching. Danielle stood up from the steps. She walked toward my car. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't crack the door. I sat there with the dispatcher in my ear and watched this woman, this stranger wearing my mother's face, press her palm flat against my driver's side glass like we were in a prison visitation scene. Please, she said, muffled through the window. I just need a week. The dispatcher asked if I felt threatened. I said yes. Because I did. Not because Danielle looked dangerous. She looked exhausted, honestly. Mascara tracked down both cheeks, wearing a hoodie too thin for the weather, but because someone had given this person my address. Someone had driven 6 hours to deposit her on my porch like a package I never ordered. And the person who did it had already driven away. Police arrived in 11 minutes. 2 officers. Danielle immediately started talking fast, desperate, the kind of talking that trips over itself. She's my sister. She said I could stay. I have text, she said. Ma'am? The officer closest to me turned. Is this your residence? Did you invite this person here? No. I told her no multiple times. I have every message. She's lying, Danielle's voice cracked. She said I could come, she said. I unlocked my phone. Opened the thread before I'd blocked her number. Handed it to the officer. He scrolled. His partner looked over his shoulder. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Every message from me was a variation of no. Asterisk. No, I can't help you. No, please don't contact me again. No, I'm sorry, but no. Asterisk. Clear. Unambiguous. Documented. Danielle's messages, by contrast, read like someone negotiating with a wall. Increasingly frantic. Increasingly entitled. The last one sent after I'd already blocked her delivered, but unread times, Gloria said she'd drive me. We're coming tomorrow. I'll only need a week. Asterisk. Not a question. A statement. As though my consent was a formality she decided to skip. The officer handed my phone back. "Ma'am," he said to Danielle, "you need to leave this property." "But I don't have anywhere to." "That's not this homeowner's problem. You were told no. You're trespassing." They helped her collect her suitcase. She was crying again. I sat in my car and felt that same flat nothing from the phone call at Windlass Lake, except now there was something underneath it. Something cold and structural, like finding a crack in your foundation. These people didn't hear me when I spoke. My words were not real to them. My no was a suggestion they felt entitled to override. Keith came outside once the cruiser left. He didn't say anything. Just opened my car door, waited for me to get out, and walked me inside. That night, I pulled up my security camera footage. What I saw made the crack in my foundation split wide open. Gloria's car had arrived 40 minutes before I got home. The footage showed her, not Danielle times, Gloria times, walking up to my front door first. She checked under the welcome mat. She lifted the ceramic pot by the railing. She ran her hand along the top of the door frame. She checked the mailbox. She tried the door handle. She walked around the side of my house and checked under a decorative rock by the garden hose. She was looking for a spare key. She was trying to get inside my home. When she didn't find one, she went back to the car, helped Danielle out with the suitcase, and drove away. Like a drop-off. Like a deployment. I filed for temporary restraining orders against both of them the next morning. Keith came with me. The clerk processing my paperwork didn't blink. She'd seen worse probably, but when I showed the footage of Gloria checking under mats and trying handles, she said quietly, "You should also file a police report for attempted unlawful entry." So I did. Gloria and Danielle were found at a hotel 20 minutes from my house. Served that afternoon. The texts that came before service were unhinged. Gloria times, "You will let that girl in or I will come make you let her in." Asterisk Danielle, as though the police encounter never happened times, "I'm coming for a week starting Thursday. Have the guest room ready." Asterisk. I wasn't staying at my house anymore. I was at Keith's in my old bedroom that he'd never converted, sleeping under a quilt he'd bought when I was 12. New cameras went up on both properties. Ring doorbell. Motion sensor lights. Keith started looking into security consultations. I started researching self-defense options. My quiet, hard-won life had become a fortress overnight because people who forgot I existed for 17 years suddenly remembered I had a spare bedroom. Here's what I keep coming back to. They didn't know my birthday. They didn't call when I was in the hospital at 14. They didn't send a card when I graduated. They didn't acknowledge my existence at any point during the 17 years I might have needed them when I was a kid who set an extra plate at dinner for a mother who was never coming back. But they found my address in 4 days, my phone number in less. Organized a 6-hour caravan. Coordinated a family-wide pressure campaign. Tried to break into my home. I was never family to them. I was a contingency plan with a guest room. And now that I've refused to be useful, I'm selfish. I'm heartless. God is watching. You know what? Let him watch. He'll see a woman who said no and meant it. And he'll see exactly who refused to hear her.
My husband would tell you that I just gave up. He'd say that for the last 2 years I checked out of our marriage and stopped doing anything around the house, leaving him to carry the entire load. And he's not wrong about the facts, just the reason. He's telling everyone he did everything. The truth is, he times pushed times me out of everything. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow chipping away at my confidence, one helpful comment at a time. I'd wash the dishes and he'd come behind me to rewash them because I missed a spot. I'd fold the laundry and he'd refold it because his way was more efficient. I'd try to decorate a room and he'd explain with a patient sigh why my choices didn't work with the aesthetic. His frustration wasn't loud, not at first. It was in the quiet sighs, the way he'd just take a task from my hands and say, "Don't worry, I'll just do it." He talks about the bigger house I wanted, but he forgets I wanted a home. What we got was his museum, a perfectly curated space where I was the clumsy guest who kept messing things up. Coming home from my job stopped feeling like a relief and started feeling like clocking in for a second shift with a manager who deeply resented my incompetence. It was exhausting. So yes, after years of feeling like I could do nothing right, I stopped trying. I retreated. I sat on the couch with my phone, or I put on headphones and watched TV. It was easier to let him have his perfect house and his perfect system than to face another lecture on how to properly load a dishwasher. He felt lonely doing everything by himself. He should try living in the same house with someone who makes you feel completely invisible. So when he sat me down a few months ago, his face all serious, and asked if I wanted a divorce, the only thing I felt was relief. It was like he'd finally found the key to a cage I didn't even realize I was trapped in. The words just came spilling out. "Yes," I said, probably too quickly. "I don't love you anymore. I can't live up to what you demand." It was the most honest thing I'd said to him in years. I thought that was it. I was ready to pack a bag and go. But then he started crying. He begged. He said he didn't realize how bad it was that he'd change. And while I was trying to process that, my phone rang. It was my mom. He must have called her. She doesn't understand our life. She just sees a man who provides, who doesn't drink or run around. She told me I was making a huge mistake, that all marriages are hard work, and that I needed to try. So I was backed into a corner, promising to work on a marriage that felt like a life sentence. A few weeks later, a new supervisor started at my work. His name is G. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, someone just talked to me. Like I was a person. He laughed at my dumb jokes. He'd send me stupid TikToks that he knew I'd find funny. We started texting, then sending snaps. It was light. It was easy. It was an escape from the crushing weight of my house, where my husband was now trying, by watching my every move, to see if I was trying hard enough. The messages with G were a lifeline. It was a friendship, plain and simple. He was going through his own stuff and we connected. It was nice to talk to someone who wasn't judging me. While my husband was studying for his big promotion board, locking himself in the office for hours every night, I was texting a friend who made me feel like myself again. I remember telling G that we'd had the divorce talk and that I was so happy about it. My husband would probably twist that to mean I was happy because of G, but that's not it at all. I was happy at the time's thought of being free, asterisk. The only part of my home that didn't feel like his territory was my 2 cats, and the thought of losing them in a divorce was the only thing that made me sad. I think he started getting suspicious around then. He'd ask who I was, texting all the time, his voice tight. I'm not an idiot. I knew he'd probably gone through my phone. I never left it unlocked, but a few times. I came back into a room, and he'd be standing near where I left it, looking guilty. It made me feel sick. Then he passed his promotion board. I was genuinely happy for him. I knew how hard he'd worked. He deserved it. He wanted to have a small barbecue with a few friends to celebrate, and I thought it was a great idea. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to show him that I was still here, that I was trying, like he asked. In that spirit, I invited a couple of my work friends, G, and another coworker, Q. I wasn't hiding anything. I wanted to try and merge my worlds. These were people who made me happy, who were becoming important to me. Why wouldn't I want them there to celebrate my husband's success? He seemed okay with it at the time. A few days later, I was making the group chat for the party when G messaged me separately. The date we'd picked was the one weekend his parents were in town and he couldn't make it. It was a simple problem with, I thought, a simple solution. That evening, I found my husband in the kitchen making a shopping list for the party. Hey, I started trying to sound casual. I was talking to G, and it turns out he can't make the 15th. Would it be a huge deal to move the barbecue to the weekend after the 22nd? He stopped writing and slowly put the pen down. He didn't look at me, just stared at the list. The silence stretched out thick and heavy. I could feel the air in the room change the easy mood, curdling into something sour and angry. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes cold. Let me get this straight, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You want me to change the date of the party celebrating Times, my Times promotion, because Times, your Times work friend, can't make it. I opened my mouth to explain that it was just a logistical question that I was just asking, but he cut me off. No, I get it, he said, a bitter, sarcastic smile twisting his lips. If you and G want to have a date, you should just say so. We can cancel my party altogether. That one sentence hung in the air between us, sharp and ugly. For a second, I couldn't even process it. All I could do was stare at him, at the bitter twist of his mouth. What? Did you just say to me? I asked, my own voice quiet and shaky. You heard me, he shot back, his face hardening. You want me to move my party for him. It's always him. You're on your phone with him day and night. Text, Snapchat, God knows what else. Do you think I'm stupid? My stomach dropped. So he had been looking. The suspicion I'd felt for weeks solidified into a cold, hard fact. You went through my phone. It wasn't a question. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. I had to. You checked out of this marriage 2 years ago, and now suddenly you're happy and giggling at your phone all the time. What was I supposed to think? He took a step closer, his voice rising. I saw what you sent him. That you were so happy we were talking about divorce. Happy. The word echoed in the kitchen. I felt a surge of white-hot anger so strong it almost made me dizzy. You have no idea what you're talking about, I seethed. That had nothing to do with him. I was happy at the idea of not having to walk on eggshells in my own house anymore. I was happy at the thought of not having every single thing I do criticized and corrected by you. "Oh, so it's my fault," he yelled. "It's my fault you're texting another man. My fault. You'd rather move my celebration than have him miss it." "It was a simple question," I screamed back, tears of pure frustration starting to well up in my eyes. "A logistical question. I was trying to include my friends, the only friends I have right now, in your celebration. I was trying to do what you asked to try. But I can't. I can't try when you see everything I do through this lens of suspicion. You've already decided I'm the bad guy." He just shook his head, a look of grim satisfaction on his face, like I just confirmed all his worst fears. "I see what's happening. You don't like me as much as you like him." The fight just drained out of me, replaced by a profound, hollow sadness. I looked at him, this angry, suspicious stranger in my kitchen, and the truth was so simple. "You're right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't. But not for the reason you think. I don't like the person you are right now. The man I married wouldn't have spied on me. He wouldn't twist a simple request into an accusation of an affair. G is my friend. He listens to me. He doesn't make me feel small or stupid. He makes me feel like a person. Something you haven't done in years." That was it. There was nothing else to say. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. It was final. We just stood there on opposite sides of the kitchen island with the ruins of our marriage between us. He looked defeated. I just felt empty. "I'm done," he said quietly, not looking at me. "I can't do this anymore." I just nodded. The relief I felt was sickening, but it was there. "I know," I said. "Me too." There was no more begging this time. No tearful phone call to my mother. He went upstairs, and I heard the sounds of drawers opening and closing. A little while later, he came down with a duffel bag over his shoulder. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked to the door, paused for a second with his hand on the knob, and then left. The click of the lock echoed through the silent house. I sank onto one of the kitchen chairs, the party shopping list still on the counter in front of me. I stared at the words buns, burgers, chips, like they were written in a foreign language. My cat, sensing the shift in the house, came and rubbed against my leg, purring. I reached down and buried my face in her fur, and that's when I finally cried. I cried for the years we'd lost, for the man I used to love, and for the woman who had slowly disappeared under the weight of his expectations. After a long time, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over G's name. I thought about explaining about, telling him he was the catalyst for the final implosion. But it felt wrong. It wasn't his fault. He was just a bystander. I typed out a simple message. "Hey, something came up. The barbecue is off. Sorry." His reply came a minute later. No worries at all. Everything okay? It will be, I typed back. And for the first time, I actually believed it. My husband thinks this is about G. He'll tell everyone that our marriage ended because I had an emotional affair. Maybe I did. But he'll never understand that G wasn't the cause of the fire. He was just the smoke that showed me the house was already burning down. I didn't leave my husband for another man. I left a marriage that felt like a prison. He thinks I'm running to someone else. He's wrong. I'm running to save myself. Jeez. My ex-husband tells a great story. He's the hero, of course. The good guy who was betrayed, the loving father, the patient husband who was pushed too far. In his version, our life was perfect until I broke it. But that's a lie. Our life was never a life. It was a checklist. We met, we were the right age, we had similar goals. So we should get married. He got a good job, I got a good job. So we should buy a house in a nice neighborhood. We had the house and the jobs. So we should have kids. I agreed to all of it. I smiled at the wedding. I picked out paint colors for the house. I nodded when he said it was time to start a family. I loved the idea of him, stable, kind, predictable. He was safe. But the person I was supposed to be in that life, the wife, the future mother, I didn't know her, and I felt like I was suffocating inside her skin. The depression wasn't something that just showed up one day. It was the background music to our entire marriage. He saw it, but he saw it like a clogged drain, a problem that needed a practical solution. He'd suggest I go for a run or maybe try a new hobby. He never once just sat down next to me on the couch in the crushing silence of our perfect house and asked me what was really going on inside my head. He never asked why the silence was so loud. So I found my own solutions. I started shopping. I'd open a credit card he didn't know about, and buy a dress I'd never wear, or shoes that were way too expensive. That little ping of the credit card machine was a secret thrill. It was a 5-minute burst of feeling something, anything other than numb. It was a stupid way to cope, I know. The debt piled up another secret I had to keep. It was another brick in the wall I was building between us. Then I got pregnant. With twins. Everyone was thrilled. His parents, my parents, all our friends. He was ecstatic walking on air. I remember the ultrasound, seeing 2 little heartbeats, and feeling nothing but sheer cold terror. He heard me say, "How am I going to cope with 2?" and thought it was just normal nerves. It wasn't. It was the sound of a prison door slamming shut and the key being thrown away. When they were born, he fell in love instantly. He was a natural. He could hold them, soothe them, look at them with this pure, uncomplicated joy. I looked at these 2 tiny, helpless babies who depended on me for everything, and I felt empty, a complete and total void. He says I rejected them, that I didn't love them. He doesn't understand. It wasn't a choice. I was broken. The part of me that was supposed to feel that motherly love was just gone. His perfect fatherhood just made me feel like even more of a monster. A year later, I tried to kill myself. He tells that part of the story as if it was connected to everything else, to the men. It wasn't. It was about the numbness. It was about waking up every single day in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else next to a man I couldn't talk to. Responsible for 2 children I felt no connection to. I just wanted it to stop. When I got out of the hospital, he thought I was better. I wasn't. I just learned how to be a better actor. The online stuff had started before the girls back in 2010. It was small then. A flirty message here, a little ego boost there. On a dating site I had no business being on. It was a fantasy. But after the girls were born, it became a lifeline. It was a place where I wasn't covered in baby food, where no one was crying, where I didn't have to pretend to be happy. I was just a woman again. Someone would tell me I was funny or smart or beautiful, and for a few minutes I'd feel a pulse. He calls it cheating and lying. For me, it was like finding an oxygen tank at the bottom of the ocean. Of course, it grew. A message became a coffee. A coffee became more. I wasn't looking for love, and I wasn't even really looking for sex. I was looking for proof that I still existed. He thinks it was all some cold, calculated plan to hurt him. It was just chaos. A series of desperate, self-destructive choices made by someone who was trying to feel something. And he always found out. He wasn't just a husband. He was a detective. He'd check the GPS on my car. He'd go through my phone while I was in the shower. I remember the feeling of my stomach dropping when I'd realize he knew. A tiny secret world had been invaded. He wasn't paranoid because I was cheating. I felt like I was being watched all the time, which just made me want to escape even more. Fights were always the same. He wouldn't yell. He'd just sit me down and present his evidence like a lawyer in a courtroom. Phone records, text messages, location data. There was never a conversation about my why. There was only the facts of my crime. I'd break down, cry, apologize, and promise it would never happen again. I'd say anything to make the interrogation stop. We'd have a few good months after that where I'd walk on eggshells and play the part of the good wife again, but the silence would always come back and I'd get desperate for a connection, for a sign of life. The worst time, the thing he probably can't forgive, was when I brought someone to our house, to our bed. Even now, it's hard to explain the logic. It wasn't about him asleep down the hall. It was about the house. That house was my cage. It was where I performed my duties as a wife and mother. For one night, I wanted it to feel like it was mine. It was reckless and selfish and incredibly stupid. It was the act of a cornered animal. In my head, I was so far gone, so disconnected from reality, that the consequences didn't even register. This cycle went on for years. I'd find a new escape, he'd find my trail. We'd have the confrontation, the apologies, the temporary peace. I was getting better at hiding things, and he was getting better at hunting for them. I felt myself breaking apart into 2 people, the smiling mom who packed lunches and went to the park, and the secret woman who was slowly burning her own life down. Then about a year ago, he caught me again. It was just some messages with a guy D, in his list of my sins. It was the usual fight, the usual tears, the usual promises. But this time something felt different. He was quieter, colder. For a few weeks he barely spoke to me. He just watched me with this look I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Something calculating. One evening he came into the living room where I was watching TV. He didn't have his phone out. He didn't have any printouts. He just stood there and said, "I've been doing some digging." "Not on your phone." My heart stopped. He said he'd found an old friend of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, and she had told him things. He looked right through me and said, "I don't just know about the messages. I know everything. I know about all of them." He laid it all out. Names I hadn't thought about in years. Dates I had tried to forget. Guy A, Guy B, Guy C. He had a whole list, a whole timeline. He had pieced together my secret broken life, like it was a murder investigation. And as he spoke, detailing my sins one by one, the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel terror. I didn't even feel shame. I felt relief. It was like a huge, heavy weight I'd been carrying for a decade was suddenly lifted off my shoulders. The dam had finally broken. The performance was over. When he was done, he just stared at me, waiting for the tears, the denials, the begging. I didn't have any of it left in me. I was just empty. "So what now?" I asked. My voice was quiet, steady. "I want a divorce," he said, and his voice cracked. He was the one who was about to cry. "Okay," I said. Just like that. "Okay." The look on his face was almost comical. He had expected a fight, a war. He didn't expect me to surrender so easily. But for me, it wasn't a surrender. It was the first honest thing to happen between us in years. The lies were gone. There was nothing left to pretend about. The cage door was finally open. But a few weeks later, he changed his mind. He came to me and said we had to try to reconcile. For the girls. He said he needed to understand what happened to process the betrayal. I knew what that meant. It wasn't about understanding me. It was about him needing to control the narrative one last time. He couldn't stand the idea that I was relieved to be free. He needed to be the one who tried to fix it, the one who graciously gave me a second chance. I was exhausted and I didn't want to fight anymore. I still love my daughters, even if it took me years to truly feel it, and I thought maybe we could find a way to be parents together. So I agreed. Those next 11 months were not a reconciliation. They were an autopsy of a death that had happened long before. It was hell. He wanted details, all of them. Every message, every meetup, every sordid little secret. He'd make me sit at the kitchen table with him for hours, going over the same events again and again like he was a detective looking for a hole in my story. It wasn't about healing. It was about him punishing me, He wanted to rub my face in my own mess. He wanted me to see the disgust in his eyes every single day. My depression, my numbness, my suicide attempt to him, those were just excuses. They were chapters in my book of reasons I'm a bad person. He couldn't see that the affairs weren't the disease. They were a symptom of a sickness that had taken over my life long ago. Every time I tried to explain the feeling of emptiness of being invisible, he would just shake his head and say, "But you lied to me. You brought a man into our bed. He only saw my crimes, never the reasons behind them." I played along for the sake of the girls. I went to therapy with him. I said all the right things. I apologized until the words lost all meaning, but my heart wasn't in it. It had left our marriage years ago. I was just a ghost in our house going through the motions. The final straw came during one of our nightly talks. He was asking about Guy A again for the 100th time. He wanted to know if I had loved him. I just stared at the wall. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't perform for him one more time. "No," I said. I didn't love him. I didn't love any of them. He seemed satisfied with that answer, but I wasn't done. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I told him the whole truth. "And I don't love you either," I said. "I'm sorry, but I haven't for a very long time. And the worst part is I'm not sad about it anymore. I'm just relieved that it's over." He looked like I'd just stabbed him. He'd been asking for the truth for years, but he only ever wanted the parts of it that made him the victim. He never wanted the truth that our marriage itself was the problem. That was the real end. We stopped pretending to reconcile after that. A few weeks later, as we were talking to lawyers, he sat me down again. He had that same cold, calculating look in his eyes. "There's one more thing," he said. "I'm having a DNA test done on the girls. Of everything I had done, of all the pain I had caused, that was the one thing that truly broke my heart. After all the years we'd spent together, after watching him hold them as newborns, after all his speeches about being a loving father, this is what it came down to. He didn't just believe I was an unfaithful wife. He believed on some level that I was a monster. A monster who would be so careless, so evil as to foist another man's children on him and lie about it for their entire lives." That was the moment I understood everything. He never saw me. He never saw my pain, my depression, my desperation. He only saw his own life, his own perfect picture, and how I had ruined it. The wife, the house, the children, we were all just pieces of his perfect life. And when one of the pieces was cracked, his only concern was whether it was truly his to begin with. The results came back, of course. The girls are his. I never for a second thought they weren't. But the fact that he had to check the fact that his trust was so completely gone that he could look at our daughters and see a lie that proves our marriage was never about us, it was always about him. I'm not going to pretend I'm the hero of this story. I made horrible, selfish choices. I hurt a man who, in his own way, was trying to be a good husband. But I'm not the simple villain he makes me out to be. I was a woman who was lost and drowning in a life I didn't choose. Now, for the first time, I'm on my own. It's terrifying, but it's also quiet. And the silence doesn't feel like a cage anymore. It feels like a beginning. My husband talks about my past like he's reading a rap sheet. Jail time, drug addiction, abuse. He lists the facts because the facts are clean, easy to file away. He can't understand what it feels like to have your entire identity be a list of things you barely survived. When I met him 20 years ago, I was a wreck. I had just clawed my way out of a very deep, very dark hole, and I was blinking in the sunlight, terrified of my own shadow. He was kind. He was stable. He had a good job, a nice apartment, and a calm voice. He saw me all sharp edges and broken pieces and decided I was someone who needed saving. I was so tired of fighting, so I let him. I let him save me. For 2 decades, that was our whole story. I was his project, the grateful, reformed woman, and he was my hero, the steady man who gave me a normal life. And I played the part. God, I played it so well. I became the perfect wife, the perfect mother to our 2 kids. I poured every ounce of myself into building the life I never had. I packed his lunches. I remembered his mother's birthday. I kept the house spotless. I supported him when he wanted to change careers. Most importantly, I managed times him asterisk. His anxiety has always been the third person in our marriage. It's a quiet ghost that sits at our dinner table and lies in our bed. For 20 years, my job has been to soothe it, to talk him down from ledges he builds in his own mind, to reassure him that everything is okay, that I'm not going anywhere, that he is good enough. I was his rock. But nobody ever asked the rock what it needs. A rock just has to be there, solid and unmoving, while everyone else leans on it. About 2 years ago, something shifted. I looked in the mirror one morning and had no idea who was looking back at me. I saw a tired, slightly overweight woman with sad eyes. I was a shell, an empty container for everyone else's needs. So I started small. I started walking, then jogging. The weight started coming off. It was slow at first, but then it was like a floodgate opened. I lost 50 pounds. And it wasn't just fat. It was armor. It was 20 years of expectation and pressure. And being the good rescued wife that I was shedding. I started buying nice skincare, not for him or for anyone else, but because the 5 minutes I spent washing my face at night felt like a revolutionary act. It was me taking care of me. I bought clothes that actually fit, clothes that made me feel good. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt desirable. Not just needed. Not just appreciated, but actually times hot asterisk. I think it shocked him. Our sex life, which had been comfortable but routine, suddenly exploded. He thought it was for him, but the truth is, it was for me. I was finally present in my own body, and I wanted to enjoy it. As I was rebuilding myself, I felt this nagging urge to clean up the wreckage of my past. There were people I'd hurt when I was a messed up teenager, ghosts I needed to put to rest. The biggest one was George. He was my high school boyfriend, a sweet boy I'd treated terribly because I didn't know how to handle kindness. I cheated on him and broke his heart in a really cruel way. It's one of the few things from that time that I still felt a deep, burning shame about. I told my husband I wanted to find him on social media and send him a message to apologize. Just to say I was sorry for the person I was back then. It was never about reconnecting romantically. It was about closing a chapter for my own peace of mind. He was hesitant, but he said, okay. I think he saw it as just another box to check on my healing journey, something he could supervise from a distance. So I messaged George. He wrote back almost immediately. He was married, had kids, a whole life. He accepted my apology and said he'd forgiven me long ago, but we just kept talking. The conversation was so easy. It was light. We talked about music and funny movies and what our kids were doing. With George, I wasn't the woman with the traumatic past. I wasn't the mom. I wasn't the wife whose job it was to manage her husband's anxiety. I was just me. A funny, interesting woman. The flirting started and it was innocent. A compliment here, an inside joke there. It was a little spark of validation that felt incredible. It was proof that this new woman I was building was being seen by someone completely outside the suffocating little world of my marriage. The text thread became my own private space. My secret garden where I could just be myself without any of the history or the weight that came with my real life. Then, a few months ago, my husband fell off a ladder while cleaning the gutters and broke his leg badly. He needed surgery. The man who I leaned on my rock was suddenly completely dependent on me for everything. His baseline neediness, the anxiety I had managed for years, became a tidal wave. He couldn't work. He couldn't drive. He couldn't even get himself a glass of water. I became his 24/7 nurse. On top of being a mom, a cook, and a housekeeper. Our home, which was once my sanctuary, started to feel like a prison. The pressure was immense. I was suffocating. That little text thread with George became my only escape valve. It was the one place I could go for 5 minutes and pretend I was someone else, somewhere else. A place where I could breathe and remember that I was a person separate from all this. Last night he was quiet. Quieter than usual. He was watching me from his recliner, his leg propped up on pillows. I thought he was just in pain. I made dinner, helped the kids with their homework, and got him his medication. I was so tired I just wanted to fall into bed. I left my phone on the kitchen counter to charge while I went to take a shower to wash the day off of me. It was the first moment I'd had to myself all day. When I walked back into the living room, a towel wrapped around me, he was still sitting in his chair. But he wasn't watching TV anymore. He was holding my phone in his hand, the screen lit up. And the look on his face wasn't pain. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, quiet stillness I had never seen before. He just looked up at me, and in that 1 second, I knew he had found my garden. How could you? His voice was low, and that was so much scarier than if he had been yelling. It was flat dead. He didn't look at my face. He just kept staring at my phone screen, as if the words on it were physically wounding him. My blood ran cold. My first instinct, the one that had been programmed into me for 20 years, was to fix it, to soothe him, to manage his pain. "It's not what you think," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I took a step closer, clutching the towel around me. "We were just talking. It's nothing." "Nothing." He finally looked up, and his eyes were hollow. "He calls you Sunshine. You sent him winky faces. You told him he was the only person you could really talk to. Is that times? Nothing times to you." Every word was a punch. He was right. Reading it back through his eyes, it looked terrible. It looked like a betrayal. In that moment, I hated myself. I hated George. I hated that I'd been so stupid. "I'm sorry." I stammered, the words falling out of me on autopilot. "I'm so sorry. I never should have. It was a mistake. I'll stop. I'll block him right now." That's what he wanted to hear. That was the script. I mess up, I repent, and I fall back into line. He nodded slowly, placing the phone back on the counter like it was a piece of evidence. He didn't say another word. He just used his crutches to get up and hobble into our bedroom, closing the door behind him. He didn't slam it. The quiet click was 1,000 times worse. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. We were living in the same house, but we were miles apart. He was polite, but cold. He'd thank me for his dinner. He'd ask where his medication was, but he wouldn't look at me. The air was so thick with unspoken anger and hurt that I could barely breathe. I started going to therapy, telling him it was to figure out why I did what I did to fix myself, so he could trust me again. That was partly true. I did feel an overwhelming sense of guilt. But I also went because I felt like I was going crazy, and I needed someone to tell me I wasn't a monster. I deleted the text thread with George. I didn't block him, but I stopped talking to him. I tried to pour myself back into being the perfect wife. I tended to my husband's leg. I made his favorite meals. I asked about his day, trying to fill the dead silence with my own voice. I was trying to rewind time, to go back to being the woman he thought he knew. Then, about 3 weeks after the night, he confronted me again. He'd had a couple of beers, and his cold politeness was gone. He cornered me in the kitchen. "Let me see your phone," he said. It wasn't a question. "Why?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Because I need to trust you again," he said, his voice rising. "And I can't trust you if you're hiding things. If you have nothing to hide, you'll give me the phone." I looked at him, standing there with his arms crossed, demanding access to my life as if it were his right. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered. All the guilt, all the shame, it all just evaporated and was replaced by a white-hot flash of anger. For 20 years, I had given him every single part of myself. My time, my body, my energy, my past. I had managed his moods, soothed his anxieties, and built my entire world around his needs. The one tiny thing I had kept for myself. a stupid secret text thread he had found and used as a weapon against me. And now he wanted to search my pockets for any other little piece of me I might have hidden away. "No," I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. I couldn't remember the last time I'd said it to him. His face turned red. "What do you mean, no? What are you hiding now?" "Nothing," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm just done. You don't get to go through my things. You don't get to treat me like a criminal you have to monitor." Before he could even argue, I grabbed my phone, opened my settings, and changed my passcode right in front of him. Then I went to my laptop and changed my email and social media passwords too. It was an act of war. I knew it. He knew it. The fight that followed was the worst one we've ever had. He called me a liar, a cheater, said I was throwing our family away for some guy from my past. He said I was just going back to being the trashy person I was when he met me. That one hurt the most. Because for 20 years that was his trump card. The idea that he had rescued me from myself, and that without him, I would revert to being that broken girl. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "This isn't about him," I finally screamed, tears streaming down my face. "This is about me. This is the first real boundary I have ever set with you, and you can't stand it." He sees the passwords as a wall I built to hide an affair. He's wrong. It's not a wall. It's a door. A door to a room that is just for me, and he doesn't have the key. Now we just exist. He tells me my therapy isn't working. He says he doesn't see me journaling or doing the work. He doesn't understand that the work isn't something you can see. The work is happening inside me. It's me in a quiet room with my therapist, learning that my needs are not less important than his fears. It's me learning that I'm sorry isn't a full sentence, and that no is. And yes, I still text George sometimes. It's not every day. It's not even about him anymore. It's about proving to myself that I can have a connection to the outside world. That my husband doesn't own or control. It's a quiet reminder that I exist outside of these four walls, outside of his shadow. It's my small private rebellion. My husband thinks he's fighting to save our marriage from another man. He has no idea what the real battle is. He's not fighting George. He's fighting me. The woman I am finally painfully becoming. A woman who doesn't need to be saved. A woman who is learning to save herself. And I honestly don't know if our marriage is going to survive her. I'm the woman who destroyed 2 families. That's what they say anyway. My husband's family, my own family, probably even the checkout lady at the grocery store. They see the scorched earth and point at me, the one holding the match. And I get it. From the outside, the facts look simple and ugly. I'm the wife who had an emotional affair with the next-door neighbor. The villain, the cliché. But they only see the explosion. They never saw the 19 years of kindling I was sitting on. My husband, Mark, and I were college sweethearts. We built a life that looked perfect on paper. We were the couple everyone wanted to be. 19 years, 2 great kids, a house we just sunk a ton of money into for a new pool. We were a team, a well-oiled machine. And that was the problem. Our marriage had become a business. We were co-CEOs of the family incorporated. Our conversations were shareholder meetings about logistics, who was handling school pickup. Had the mortgage been paid? Did you remember to call the plumber about the leak? The romance didn't die in a big dramatic fight. It just faded out like a radio station losing its signal. One day, I realized he hadn't really looked times at me in years. He'd look in my direction, sure. He'd see the person who needed to sign a permission slip, or the person who forgot to buy milk. But he didn't see times me, asterisk. I was a functional object in his life like the couch or the refrigerator. I'd tried to talk to him about it sometimes in the beginning. I'd say I felt distant, lonely. He'd just get this confused look on his face and say, "What are you talking about? I'm right here." But he wasn't. Not really. The silence in our house was so loud it would ring in my ears. Then came David and Sarah, our neighbors. They moved in 6 years ago, and it was a breath of fresh air. We all clicked instantly. Backyard barbecues, holiday parties, our kids playing together until it was dark. It was the 4 of us, a little suburban tribe. For the first time in a long time, I felt like part of something fun. With David, it was different. It wasn't a spark. Not at first. It was just easy. One afternoon, we were all outside watching the kids swim. I made a comment about feeling overwhelmed about how I was struggling with a project at work and felt like I was failing at everything. Mark just grunted something from behind his phone, probably scrolling through sports scores. He didn't even look up. But David, who was grilling burgers, stopped and turned to me. He said, "That sounds really tough." "What's the project about?" It was such a small thing. A simple question. But it felt like a dam breaking inside me. He actually listened. He asked more questions. For 10 minutes, I wasn't just a wife or a mom. I was a person with a problem who was being heard. That conversation was the first drop of water in a desert. The texting started after that. It was innocent. He sent me a funny article related to what we'd talked about. I sent him a meme. It was an extension of that feeling, that little bit of connection. But it grew. Fast. It became our private world. I could tell him about my bad day and he wouldn't try to fix it. He'd just say, "That sucks, I'm sorry." I could share a stupid thought and he'd get the joke. He saw the me that Mark hadn't seen in a decade. Soon we were texting constantly. Hundreds of messages a day. I know how that sounds. It sounds crazy, obsessive. And it was. It was an addiction to being seen. Mark was right there sitting on the same couch and we'd be texting. He'd be watching TV talking at me during the commercials about his fantasy football team, and I'd be in my phone having a real conversation with David. David, who was sitting in his own living room right across the street, was closer to me than the man whose shoulder was practically touching mine. I want to be clear about one thing because it's the first thing everyone assumes. Nothing physical ever happened. Not a single touch. Mark even admits that though he says it like he's doing me a favor, he doesn't understand that it was never about that. It was about my mind. It was about my heart. It was about feeling like I existed. This thing with David was where I went to feel alive. Then one day the weight of it all hit us. The feelings had gotten too big. It wasn't just a friendship anymore. We both knew it. We were standing on the edge of a cliff looking down at our families, and we were terrified. We weren't bad people. We weren't trying to run away and start a new life. We loved our spouses. We loved our kids. But we were holding this thing between us that felt like a live grenade, and we had no idea what to do with it. So we decided to do something that felt responsible. It sounds insane now, I know, but at the time it felt like the only logical adult thing to do. We found a counselor. We started seeing her times together, asterisk. Our goal wasn't to figure out how to be a couple. It was the opposite. We were trying to find a professional who could help us figure out how to put this all back in a box. How to defuse the bomb without it blowing up in everyone's faces. We wanted to manage these feelings, to understand them, and to go back to being just neighbors and friends without anyone ever getting hurt. We were trying so hard to do the right thing with a completely wrong situation. We had a session last week, and for the first time I felt a little bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. I walked into my house after that session feeling lighter. Scared, but lighter. I put my purse and keys on the kitchen counter. My phone was in my hand. Mark walked in from the living room. He didn't say hello. He just stood there staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. His eyes weren't angry, not yet. They were cold. He looked from my face down to the phone in my hand and then back up to me. The silence in the room was different this time. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy. And it was about to break. "What's wrong?" I asked. My voice barely a whisper. My heart was pounding against my ribs. "Give me your phone," he said. It wasn't a request. I clutched it tighter. "Mark, what is this about?" "Give me the goddamn phone, Sarah." The coldness was gone, replaced by something hot and dangerous. He took a step forward and I flinched back, handing it over. It was unlocked. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't have entered the passcode anyway. He didn't have to look for long. He opened my text with David. His thumb just scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. The screen was a blur of our private world, our jokes, our confessions, our fears. He didn't speak. He just stood there under the kitchen lights, his face getting tighter and darker with every swipe of his thumb. The silence was terrifying. Then he looked up and the bomb we had been trying to defuse went off directly in my face. For the next 36 hours, he screamed. It wasn't a conversation. It was a verbal assault. He followed me from room to room, his voice echoing off the walls. He read our texts out loud, his voice dripping with sarcasm and disgust, twisting every innocent word into something sordid. He called me a whore, a slut, a stupid, selfish child. He kept repeating the numbers. 500 texts yesterday, what could you possibly have to say to him? You don't even talk to me 5 times a day. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him how lonely I was, how the silence in our marriage had become a physical weight I couldn't carry anymore. I tried to tell him that David just times listened, that it wasn't about sex or a secret plan to run away. I even told him about the counselor. I thought that would prove I was trying to fix it to do the right thing. That was a mistake. "A counselor!" he roared, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. "You were seeing a counselor times with him, times! You were planning your new life on my dime!" "No," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "We were trying to stop it. We were trying to figure out how to stay in our marriages without hurting anyone." He just laughed. It was a horrible, bitter sound. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can cheat and then go to therapy to feel good about it?" In his mind, my desperation was a childish crush. The years of my loneliness, my attempts to connect with him, my quiet suffering, all of it was erased. It didn't exist. Because if it did, he would have to admit he had a part to play. It was so much easier for him to believe I was just a bad person. He didn't ask a single question about why. He didn't ask what he could have done differently. He didn't ask if I was unhappy. He just told me what I had done wrong and who I was a monster. By the next morning, everyone knew. He had called his parents, his siblings, my parents. He got to them first. He controlled the story, painting himself as the loyal, blindsided husband and me as the conniving, unfaithful wife who was wrecking two families. My phone, which he'd thrown back at me, started lighting up with messages from my own family. Not asking for my side, but telling me how disappointed they were. How could I do this to Mark? How could I do this to my children? I was a villain in my own life story, and the ink was already dry. No one cared about the first 18 chapters. They only saw the ugly final page that Mark had written for them. After 2 days of his rage burning itself out, he finally sat down with me. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were still hard. "I've thought about it," he said, like a judge delivering a verdict. "And I'm willing to take you back." Relief washed over me for a split second before he continued. "But there are conditions. First, you will never speak to David again. Ever. If you see him outside, you go back in the house. You block his number, you block him on everything. Second, I get full access to your phone whenever I want it. Passwords, everything. You don't get a private digital life anymore. You lost that privilege." I just stared at him. It wasn't a plan for reconciliation. It was a prison sentence. He didn't want to rebuild trust. He wanted to enforce control. He didn't want to fix the gaping hole in our marriage. He just wanted to board it up so no one could see it. He saw the problem not as my deep, profound unhappiness, but as my connection with David. So his solution was simple: remove David and chain me up. He wanted to erase the man who saw me so he would never have to risk looking at me himself. That's where we are now. I'm living in a house that feels more like a cage than a home. I agreed to his terms. What choice did I have? I'm the monster who almost destroyed everything. I'm supposed to be grateful for this second chance. So I walk on eggshells. David and I haven't spoken a word. Sometimes I see him getting his mail and my chest physically aches. Not because I want to run away with him, but because I miss my friend. I miss the one person who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. Mark watches me all the time. He picks up my phone at random, scrolls through it, then puts it down without a word. The silence is back, but it's heavier now. It's filled with suspicion and resentment. He thinks he's won. He thinks he solved the problem. But he hasn't. He just took away my one source of water and left me in the same desert, expecting me to be grateful for the sand. He thinks love is about possession, about history, about keeping the family unit intact no matter the emotional cost. But I was dying for connection. I finally found it in the wrong place, and it lit a fire that burned my whole world down. And now I'm standing in the ashes, completely alone, with everyone pointing at me, the woman who was foolish enough to want to feel alive. I know you've probably heard his side of the story. I'm the monster. The cheating wife who blew up a perfectly good marriage. And maybe I am. But it's not that simple. Nothing ever is. You can't understand why I did what I did unless you understand the silence. Our house was full of a comfortable, soul-crushing silence. He was a good man. Everyone says so, and they're right. He paid the bills, he fixed the leaky faucet, he remembered my favorite takeout order. For 10 years, he was my best friend. But sometime along the way, he stopped being my husband. We were roommates who shared a bed and a mortgage. The passion wasn't just gone. It felt like it had never existed. It was like I was living in a memory of a life, not a real one. I felt invisible. I'd put on a new dress and he'd say, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from his phone. I'd try to start a fight just to feel something, to see a spark of anything in his eyes. I'd complain about something stupid, something I didn't even care about, hoping he'd push back. But he never would. He'd just nod and say, "You're right, I'll take care of it." He thought he was keeping the peace, but what he was really doing was telling me that my feelings, even my anger, weren't worth engaging with. I was just background noise. Then Mark started at my office. It wasn't love. It was attention. When he talked to me, he looked at me. I mean, he really saw times me. He'd laugh at my stupid jokes. He noticed when I got my hair cut. It was a fire hose of validation after years in a desert. The sexting started as a joke, a dumb, dangerous game. It was a fantasy world where I was wanted, desired, and fought over. It was a place I could go when the silence in my own home became too loud. Of course, he found the texts. I wasn't even that careful. I think a part of me wanted him to find them. When he confronted me, his voice was so level. No yelling, no tears. Just a calm, disappointed logic. And in that moment, seeing him so controlled, I saw my chance. It was a horrible, twisted idea, but it felt like my last hope. This was the test. I was going to put our marriage on the line, and I was praying, literally praying, that he would finally fight for it. I told him it was just a fantasy, but that I wanted to see what it was like. I asked him for a hall pass. I watched his face holding my breath, waiting for the explosion. I wanted him to get angry. I wanted him to call me a slut. I wanted him to throw a plate against the wall and tell me that I was his and only his, and that he'd never let me go. I wanted the man I married, the one with fire in his belly, to come roaring back to life and claim his wife. He just looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Okay. If this is something you feel you need to do, then you have my permission." Permission. The word hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't progressive or understanding. It was indifference. It was the ultimate. I don't care. He wasn't giving me freedom. He was telling me I wasn't valuable enough to keep. Something inside me snapped. If he didn't care enough to stop me, then I was going to make him care. I was going to punish him for his calmness. The night I was supposed to meet Mark for the first time, I did something cruel. I handed my husband my phone and told him to take some pictures of me. Sexy ones. I wore a new dress, did my makeup, and posed. With every click of the camera, I searched his eyes for a flicker of jealousy, of rage, of anything. There was nothing. Just a quiet sadness that made me even angrier. He was a photographer documenting my betrayal, not a husband watching his wife walk out the door to another man. I left that night feeling hollow. The whole drive to the hotel, I kept checking my phone, hoping he'd call, begging me to come home, tell me he'd made a mistake. The phone never rang. The first weekend was a blur of alcohol and regret, and a strange, empty feeling. It didn't fix anything. It didn't make me feel desired. It just made me feel cheap. And when I got home, he just asked if I had a good time like I'd been out with my girlfriends. So I knew I had to push it further. I had to do something so far over the line that he couldn't just rationally accept it. I needed to break him. The next weekend, I told him I was going out with Mark again. This time, I didn't come home. I didn't call. I didn't text. I let him stew in the silence he created. I let things get messy. Mark had a friend over, and I didn't say no. I needed a story. I needed a confession so shocking, so undeniably awful, that it would finally force a reaction from the man made of stone. I walked in the next afternoon, and he was sitting on the couch right where I'd left him. He just looked up at me, his face tired. "Where were you?" he asked. His voice was flat. I didn't soften it. I didn't lie. I told him everything. I told him I stayed the night. I told him about Mark's friend. I described it in a way I knew would hurt. I watched his face, my heart pounding, waiting for the dam to break. And for the first time in years, I saw it. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something deeper. A flicker of real, genuine pain behind his eyes. The calm mask finally cracked. He looked wounded. He looked broken. A sick, twisted part of me felt a surge of triumph. Finally, he was feeling something. Now we could finally have the fight that would save us. But he didn't fight back. He didn't yell. That flicker of pain was swallowed by a terrifying calm. The mask was back on, but it was different this time. It wasn't passive anymore. It was made of ice. "So?" I said, my voice sharp, trying to get another reaction. "Now you're upset. You gave me permission, remember? What's the problem? A little too real for you, can't handle a woman who actually does what she wants. I was being vicious. I was poking the bear, wanting it to roar. He just looked at me, and it was like he was looking through me. I need to pack a bag," he said, his voice completely flat. My heart dropped into my stomach. "What? What are you talking about? We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he said, walking past me towards our bedroom. I followed him, my sick triumph turning into ice-cold panic. This wasn't the plan. The plan was for him to get angry, for us to scream and cry and throw things, and then fall into bed having rediscovered the passion we'd lost. The plan was not for him to be silent. Not this kind of silence. This was the silence of an ending. He pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet and started taking clothes from his drawers. T-shirts, socks, jeans. Methodical. Detached. Like he was packing for a business trip. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "You can't just leave. You're the one who said okay. You're the one who didn't care." He didn't even look at me. He just kept packing. That's when the victory I thought I'd won felt like ash in my mouth. He wasn't just leaving the room. He was leaving times us asterisk. He zipped up the bag, walked to the front door, and was gone. I just stood there in the living room, surrounded by a quiet that was 1,000 times worse than the one I had tried to destroy. My texts to him that night were a mess. First angry, "How dare you just walk out?" Then confused, "I don't understand, you said this was okay." Then finally pleading, "Please come home. We need to talk." He didn't answer a single one. He came back the next afternoon. My heart leaped when I saw his car, thinking he was ready to finally have it out. But he wasn't alone. His brother was with him. His brother, who looked at me with so much contempt I felt like I was shrinking. They weren't there to talk. They were there to move him out. My husband had brought a bodyguard to his own home. Panic, real gut-wrenching panic took over. He was a stone wall. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me. He just started gathering his things while his brother stood by the door like a bouncer. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't let him just disappear without a word. I ran to him as he was carrying a box of books. "Please," I begged, grabbing his arm. "Just talk to me. Yell at me, hit me, just do times something, asterisk." He pulled his arm away like I had burned him. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I lost it. I just completely lost it. I started beating on his chest with my fists, not hard enough to hurt him, but just to feel him to break through that wall of nothing he'd put up. It was a desperate animal. I was screaming at him without making a sound. "Times. Fight for me. Look at me. Don't you give up on us, Times." He grabbed my wrists and just pushed me away. Not violently, but firmly. It was a clear physical message. "You can't reach me anymore." I stumbled back, and his brother took a step toward me. I had become something to be managed. Then my phone rang. It was my mom. I thought maybe he'd called her, asked her to talk to me. I was wrong. She was crying, but she was also furious. "What did you do?" she screamed into the phone. "Your father and I get a call from your husband telling us that you slept with 2 men. What is wrong with you?" The blood drained from my face. It was the ultimate betrayal. He hadn't fought me face to face. He had gone behind my back. He'd used my own parents, the 2 people whose approval I cherished, as his weapon. He poisoned the well. He turned my own family against me before I even knew there was a war. After he and his brother had loaded the last box, I stood on the porch, shaking with a rage that felt white hot. "You called my parents!" I screamed at him across the lawn. "You told them before you even told me you were leaving for good." He finally stopped and turned to look at me, his face set like granite. "They deserve to know who their daughter really is," he said. "And who am I?" shot back, tears streaming down my face now. "The monster! I did this for us! I did this to get you to wake up!" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Wake up? You think this was a wake-up call? This was an execution." He walked over to me, and for a second I thought he might actually grab me, show some of that fire I've been dying to see. Instead, he just stood in front of me, his voice dropping to a dead quiet whisper that was scarier than any shout. "I'm filing for divorce." The word hit me like a physical blow. Divorce. My entire stupid, horrible, misguided plan just collapsed in on itself. The anger vanished, replaced by a bottomless black hole of despair. The sobs that came out of me weren't for show. They were real ugly, and ripped from the deepest part of my soul. I had lost. I had lost everything. The texts I sent after that were different. The voicemails were different. "I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please, we can fix this. I love you. Please don't do this." I was finally saying the things I should have been saying all along. But it was too late. He had already checked out. My permission slip wasn't an act of progressive understanding. It was his resignation letter. He hadn't been a passive bystander. He had been a man quietly watching his marriage die. And my actions were just me shoveling dirt on the coffin. I finally understood. I kept testing the foundations of our home with a sledgehammer, acting shocked when the whole thing came crashing down around me. I thought I was screaming for help, but all he heard was the cruelty. I wasn't trying to leave him. I swear to God. But all I ever wanted was to make him fight to stay. And in the end, I just made it impossible for him to do anything else but go. I know what you think of me. My husband probably posted his side, and I'm sure I sound like a monster. The pregnant wife who cheated in her own home. There's no excuse for what I did, and I won't make any. But if you're going to judge me, you should at least know why. You should know what it feels like to slowly disappear. It started with the house. Buying it was supposed to be our dream, but it almost broke us. The stress was unreal. We fought constantly about money, about repairs, about everything. When we finally moved in, I thought the hard part was over. I thought we could finally relax and be a family again. Our toddler was running around the new backyard, and all I could think about was filling the quiet rooms with more life. I wanted another baby. I told him one night after we put our son to bed. I was so excited talking about turning the spare room into a nursery. But he didn't smile. He just got this look on his face, this tired, heavy look. He started talking about his job, about needing more stability, about the cost of the house. But that's not what I heard. What I heard was, "You're too much. This family is a burden." It was the first time I felt a real crack form between us. A few months later, I got pregnant anyway. For a day, he seemed happy. Genuinely happy. But then it was like a switch flipped. He announced he was going to study for a new career. He said it was for us, for our future. But it wasn't. It was for him. It was a wall he built brick by brick every single night. His routine was always the same. He'd come home from work, we'd eat dinner in near silence, and then he'd say, "Well, I've got to go study." He would disappear upstairs to his office, and I wouldn't see him again until he came to bed long after I was asleep. I was pregnant, throwing up in the mornings and chasing a 2-year-old all day. I was exhausted, and I was completely, utterly alone, drowning in the silence of our big, empty dream house. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was the property manager who also provided childcare. He never once asked how I was feeling. He never put a hand on my stomach unless I took his and placed it there myself. I was invisible. So I started trying to see myself again. It wasn't about anyone else, not at first. It was for me. I started taking long baths after the toddler was asleep. I'd do my makeup just to wash it off an hour later. I started shaving my legs again. I just needed to remember the woman I was before I became a ghost who just made dinner and did laundry. Then came David. He's a colleague at my work, older, married, nothing special. But he saw me. That's all it took. It started with nothing. "How was your weekend in the break room?" "That's a nice color on you when I wore a new blouse." It was the kind of basic attention I was starving for. It felt like a glass of water after days in the desert. That attention turned into texts. Little jokes, then longer conversations. It became my escape. In my real life, I was a tired, pregnant mom talking to a toddler all day. In our texts, I was funny and smart and interesting. I was a person someone wanted to talk to. I know what you're And yes, it went there. It was wrong and reckless and stupid. The texts got dirtier. He'd give me little assignments, send a picture, wear a certain color underwear to work. It was a game, and it was a thrill. But it wasn't just about sex. It was the thrill of being desired. It was a jolt of electricity in a life that had gone completely numb. I felt powerful. I felt alive. The first time I lied to my husband to see him, I told him I was meeting an old friend from school for coffee. The guilt was suffocating, but I did it anyway. I needed to protect that one little corner of my life where I felt like I existed. At home, I was a pregnant ghost. With David for just an hour, I was a woman again. The house my husband worked so hard for felt like my cage. The affair was my key, and I didn't care that it opened a door to nowhere. We had sex at work. We had sex in my car. And yes, we had sex in my house. In my own bed. I know how horrible that is. There's a part of me that looks back and doesn't even recognize the person who did that. It was self-destructive. It was like I wanted to get caught, to blow up the silence and make him finally look at me, even if it was with hatred. And he did. He found the messages on my laptop. One night I came downstairs and he was just standing in the living room holding it. The look on his face, it shattered everything. The fantasy world I'd built came crashing down, and all that was left was this horrible, ugly reality. He confronted me, and it was awful. But underneath all the shame, a tiny part of me was relieved. The silence was finally broken. He was yelling, crying, but at least he was talking to me. I tried to explain, but how do you tell your husband that you cheated because he was too quiet? How do you explain a loneliness so deep it makes you do insane things? It all sounded like pathetic excuses. So, I just said the stupid things people say. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. It was the hormones. He said we could try to fix it. He wanted to save our family for our son and for the baby on the way. I swore the affair was over. I deleted David's number. I promised I would do whatever it took. And for a few weeks we tried. But it was a joke. His idea of spending more time with me was watching me like a hawk. When he touched me, it didn't feel like love. It felt like he was checking his property, reclaiming what had been stolen. The loneliness was still there, but now it had a new friend suspicion. The cage just got smaller. I had ended it with David over text, but it felt messy, unfinished. I felt like I couldn't truly start over, couldn't really commit to my marriage, until I ended it properly face to face. It was a selfish, stupid idea, I know. But I needed to look him in the eye and say the words, "This is over. I'm choosing my family." I needed to close that door myself. I told my husband I had a one-day business trip a few towns over. It was the easiest lie. He didn't question it. He just gave me that same flat, empty look he always did. The drive there felt heavy. The meeting was short and awkward in a generic coffee shop. I said what I needed to say. He was sad, but understood. There was no drama, just a quiet, pathetic end to a stupid mistake. Driving home, I actually felt a flicker of hope. I had closed the door. Now I could go home and really, truly start to fix my marriage. Now I could try to earn back his trust. I pulled into our driveway late that night, exhausted but ready. Ready to apologize for the rest of my life if that's what it took. I opened the front door and he was standing there in the exact same spot he was the night he first found out, his face pale under the hallway light. He wasn't yelling. He was perfectly calm. And that's what scared me the most. "How was your business trip?" he asked. His voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. My blood went cold. It wasn't a real question. It was a trap. I could feel the invisible wires of it tightening around my chest. I knew in that single gut-wrenching moment that he knew everything. "It was fine," I said, my voice sounding weak and foreign. "Just long. I'm tired." I tried to walk past him to go upstairs and pretend to be asleep to buy myself time to think. But he didn't move. He just stood there blocking my way. "The conference center?" he said, his voice still flat dead. "What was the name of it again? I might need to go there for work next month." My mind was a blank, static-filled screen. A name. I needed a name. The Civic Plaza downtown, I stammered, pulling a name out of thin air. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. He just nodded slowly, a tiny bitter smile touching his lips. "That's funny," he said, "because I called your work. I talked to Sarah. She said there wasn't any business trip today. For anyone." The floor dropped out from under me. I leaned against the wall for support, my hand instinctively going to my pregnant belly. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. His calm finally broke, but it didn't erupt into yelling like the first time. It fractured into something much colder, much sharper. "You went to see him, didn't you?" "No," I said, the denial automatic pathetic. I needed to get away. I drove to the coast. I just needed to think. It was another lie, a desperate attempt to make the betrayal seem smaller than it was. To make it about me and my confusion, not about me and another man. He just shook his head, pulling his own phone from his pocket. He turned the screen towards me. It was a map. Pinpointed on the map was the exact coffee shop where I had met David just hours before. My breath caught in my throat. Had he followed me? Was there a tracker on my car? I felt sick. "Don't lie to me anymore," he said, his voice shaking with a rage he was barely holding back. "Just for once, stop lying." I couldn't speak. What was there to say? He had me pinned and exposed. "Prove it," he said, his eyes hard. "Prove to me it was just coffee. Prove it's really over." He held up his phone. "Send him a message right now. From your phone. Say, 'My husband knows we met today. He knows everything. Let's see what Mr. Closure has to say about that.'" And that was it. That was the moment everything broke for good. This wasn't about truth. It was a test of loyalty, a purity test he knew I'd fail. It was about power. He wanted to watch me type out my own humiliation. He wanted to see the proof that I was his, that he could control me, that he could make me perform my repentance on command. "No," I whispered. "What?" "No," I said louder this time, my own anger starting to burn through the fear. "I'm not doing that." "Give me the phone," he demanded, taking a step closer. "I'll do it." He reached for my purse, for my phone, and I reacted. It wasn't a thought. It was a pure animal instinct. I grabbed my phone and clutched it to my chest like it was my own heart. It was the last piece of me that felt like it was still mine. My last private space. My last thought. He couldn't read. His face changed. The anger was replaced by a look of utter final devastation. To him, that single motion, that desperate grab, was the only confession that mattered. "So you slept with him," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. "You lied to me? And you slept with him again?" "I didn't," I cried, "and it was the truth. I swear I didn't. I went to end it. I just couldn't. I couldn't let you do that. It's not about him. It's about you trying to control me." But it didn't matter. He didn't believe me. My words were just noise. Snatching the phone was the only thing he saw, the only thing he heard. He looked at me like he had never seen me before, like I was a complete stranger. A monster standing in his hallway. Without another word, he turned and walked upstairs. I stayed frozen, listening to the sounds echoing from our bedroom. The scrape of a drawer opening, the muffled thud of clothes being thrown onto the bed, the zip of a suitcase. Each sound was a hammer blow to my chest. He came back down a few minutes later carrying a duffel bag. He wouldn't look at me. He walked to the front door, his hand resting on the knob. His gaze drifted to the closed door of our son's bedroom, and for the first time his face completely crumpled. A sob escaped his lips, a raw, wounded sound that I will never forget. That was for our son. That was the pain I had caused our perfect, innocent little boy. And it broke me more than any of his anger ever could. "I'm going to my parents," he said, his voice thick. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence I had been so desperate to escape came rushing back in heavier and more absolute than ever before. It was the sound of the end. It's been a few weeks. He's still at his parents'. We text, but only about our son. Logistics. Who has him on what day? His messages are short, cold. The word lawyer has been used. I spend my nights alone in this huge, quiet house that was supposed to be our dream. It feels more like a mausoleum now. Do I regret it? Every second of every day? I hate the person I became. I hate the choices I made. I look at my son and I see his father's eyes, and the shame is so overwhelming I can barely breathe. I blew up my family because I felt lonely. How pathetic is that? But when I'm alone in the dark, I can't forget the why. The loneliness was real. The invisibility was real. Feeling like a ghost in your own life is a kind of slow death, and I was just trying to feel my own heartbeat again. My husband built a wall around himself, and instead of trying to talk my way through it, I strapped a bomb to myself and blew the whole house up. We both destroyed this family. I was just the one who lit the fuse. I'm just a pregnant single mother sitting in the rubble with no one to blame but myself. I know how my husband tells this story. I'm the villain. The cheating wife who threw away a perfectly good marriage for a fling with an old high school boyfriend. He's the victim, the good guy who was betrayed in his own home. And in a way, he's not wrong. I did a terrible thing. But his story starts at the end. Mine starts with the silence. My husband, Mark, is a good man. I want to be clear about that. He pays the bills. He fixes things when they break. He never forgot my birthday. On paper, he was a perfect husband. But a marriage doesn't live on paper. It lives in the small spaces in between the big things. The look across a room, the hand on your back. When you're telling a stupid story, the way you talk about your day and know someone is actually listening. Those spaces in our marriage have been empty for years. Our life was a timetable. He'd get home from work, I'd have dinner ready. We'd eat while watching the news. He'd ask, "How was your day?" and be scrolling through his phone before I could finish my first sentence. Then we'd move to the couch. He'd put on a basketball game or some action movie he'd seen a dozen times, and I'd sit beside him, a ghost on our own sofa. I felt less like a wife and more like a roommate he happened to be sleeping with. A very efficient household manager. I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely you feel when you're by yourself, but the worst kind. The kind you feel when you're sitting right next to the person who is supposed to be your everything, and you've never felt further apart. When the pandemic hit, that quiet house became a prison. The silence wasn't just a lack of conversation anymore. It was a physical weight. We were trapped together, and the distance between us felt like a mile-wide canyon in our own living room. Then Alex came back into my life. We dated for a couple of years in high school, one of those sweet, innocent first loves. We stayed friends on social media over the years, liking a photo here and there, but that was it. When lockdown started, he posted that he was going crazy trying to work from his tiny studio apartment. On a whim, I messaged him. I told him we had a spare room we used for storage and that he was welcome to use it as an office. Mark didn't mind. He barely seemed to notice. Suddenly, there was noise in the house again. Good noise. Laughter. Alex and I would take coffee breaks in the kitchen and we'd talk. We talked about everything and nothing. Old teachers we hated. Dumb music we used to love. What we were afraid of, what we hoped for. He remembered things about me I hadn't thought about in a decade. He'd say, "You still do that little head tilt thing when you're really listening." And my heart would just ache. Because when was the last time Mark had noticed anything like that? Working together felt normal, easy. It was a lifeline. Mark was still in his own world, locked in his home office for meetings all day, emerging only for food before disappearing again. But now I didn't mind as much. My days had a spark in them again. The line between work and friendship started to blur so slowly I didn't even see it happening. A 5-minute coffee break would turn into a 30-minute lunch. Work would officially end at 5. But then we'd decide to order a pizza and play a few rounds of a video game to unwind. We'd sit on the floor of the living room shouting at the screen and laughing until our stomachs hurt. I was having more real, genuine fun in those few hours than I'd had with my own husband in 5 years. I felt alive. I felt seen. Then came the night on the couch. It had been a long, stressful week for both of us. We decided to watch some dumb comedy to switch our brains off. Mark was out with a friend, a rare pandemic-era outing. I was exhausted mentally and physically. Halfway through the movie, without even really thinking about it, I laid down and rested my head in Alex's lap. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't a move. It was just comfortable. like leaning on your best friend. It was the simple, trusting touch that I had been starving for. In that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. And of course, that's when Mark came home. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood in the doorway, his keys still in his hand, his face unreadable. The silence was heavy, terrifying. Alex immediately sat up, and I scrambled to sit on the other end of the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. The innocent comfort of a second ago had been twisted into something ugly and guilty under Mark's gaze. "What the hell is this?" he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. I tried to explain. "Mark, it's not what it looks like. We were just watching a movie. I was tired." He laughed, but it was a cold, bitter sound. "Tired? You looked pretty comfortable resting your head in his lap. In my house. On my couch." The fight exploded from there. He wasn't asking questions. He was making accusations. He didn't care that I was lonely or that our marriage was a hollow shell. All he saw was a violation of his property. He screamed at me, called me a slut, told Alex to get his stuff and get out and never come back. He never once asked me how I was feeling or why I might need comfort from someone else. It was all about his anger, his pride, his rules. He was a man whose territory had been invaded, and he was there to put me back in my place. That night, after Alex had gone and the house was silent again, the silence was different. It was hostile. Mark slept on the couch he had just reclaimed. Lying in our marital bed alone, I felt a chasm open up between us, one so deep and wide I knew I could never cross it. He hadn't just gotten angry. He had shown me that he saw me as a possession, not a partner. His rage didn't make me want to fix things. It pushed me away right into the arms of the one person who had been offering kindness instead of fury. A week later, things at home were still frozen. We moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The air was thick with resentment. I was miserable, terrified, and so incredibly lonely. I missed my friend. So I called him. I told Mark I was going to the grocery store. I drove to a park and we just sat in my car and talked. And then I broke down crying and he held me. It was a terrible mistake, but it was the first time I had felt safe and understood in so long. That was the start of it. The real betrayal. The lies got easier after that. I'd meet Alex for lunch, for a walk, anything to escape the morgue. My home had become. Mark became even more distant, but in a strange new way. He stopped being angry and just became cold, watchful. Sometimes I'd catch him just looking at me from across the room with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Something calculating. A pit of dread lived in my stomach, a constant hum of anxiety, telling me something was deeply wrong. I knew a storm was coming, I just didn't know what it would look like. Then one Tuesday afternoon I was making coffee in the kitchen, and he came home from work early. He walked in and just stood there in the doorway, watching me. He didn't say hello. He didn't move to put his bag down. He just stood there, his face a blank mask. My heart started hammering against my ribs. After a silence that felt like an eternity, he spoke. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion at all. "We need to talk," he said. "In the bedroom. Now." I followed him my feet, feeling like they were sinking into the floor with every step. The pit of dread in my stomach had hardened into a block of ice. I knew this was it. This was the storm. I walked into our bedroom, the room where I had cried myself to sleep so many nights, and watched as he sat on the edge of the bed. Our bed. He didn't turn on the main light, just the small lamp on his nightstand, casting long, dark shadows across the room. He looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. "I know you've been seeing him," he said. The voice was the worst part. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sad. It was completely flat, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. My body went into autopilot, the instinct to lie and protect myself kicking in. "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. I told you after that night." He let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. It was a terrible sound. "Don't," he said, cutting me off. "Just for once, don't lie to me. I know you've been lying. I know about the park. I know about the lunches. I know about him coming here to this house while I'm at work." The air left my lungs. My mind was racing, trying to figure it out. Had someone seen us? Did he check my phone? How could he possibly know the details? He watched my confusion, his expression unmoving. And then he delivered the final blow, the two words that would tear down what little was left of our life together. "I have cameras." The floor fell out from under me. For a second, I couldn't process it. Cameras. It sounded like something from a movie. It couldn't be real. "What?" I whispered. "In the living room," he said, his voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's. He gestured vaguely to the ceiling corner of our bedroom. "And in here." I looked where he pointed at the innocent white corner of the room, and I felt sick. A wave of shame so intense it was like a physical fire washed over me, burning my face, my neck, my entire body. He had seen. He had seen everything. But as the shame swirled, something else, something cold and horrifying, started to bubble up underneath it. He never intended to trust me again. After that first fight on the couch, he never planned to talk it out or try to understand. He had made his decision. He judged me, found me guilty, and immediately started gathering evidence for my execution. He didn't want a partner to work things out with. He wanted a suspect to catch. He had treated our home like an interrogation room, and our life together like a crime he needed to solve. "I saw it all," he continued, his voice finally starting to crack with a cold, contained rage. "I watched you bring him into our house. I watched you bring him into our bed. Asterisk. My Times bed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. What could I possibly say? He had a recording of my greatest shame. He had watched me betray him, not in a moment of anger, but with cold, hard, undeniable video proof. He had set a trap, and I had been too lost and too stupid to see it. I just walked right in. My betrayal was born from years of loneliness and a moment of selfish weakness. It was a messy, emotional human mistake. His betrayal felt so much worse. It was methodical. It was calculated. It was a complete violation of the trust and privacy that a marriage is supposed to be built on. He didn't want a resolution. He wanted to win. And he had. So what now? I finally managed to ask. My voice barely a whisper. The room felt like a tomb. "Now it's over," he said, standing up. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them." It was then, in that moment of absolute ruin, with everything broken around me, that I said the one thing that still felt true. "Let's go to counseling." He looked at me as if I'd just suggested we fly to the moon. "Are you serious? You have got to be kidding me. After what you did, there's nothing to counsel." "Yes, there is." The words tore out of me, fueled by hot, shameful tears that were finally streaming down my face. "I want you to see it, Mark. I want you to see the whole picture. I want a professional to sit in a room with us while I explain how for years I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. How I would try to talk to you and you'd just stare at your phone. How our life became a schedule of chores and silence. I am not saying what I did was right. It was horrible. And it was wrong. And I will be ashamed of it for the rest of my life. But it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It happened because I was withering on the vine. You can't leave a marriage to die of neglect and then act shocked when someone else finally notices. He just stood there, shaking his head slowly. The anger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary disgust. He wasn't listening. He didn't see me, the lonely wife crying in the wreckage of her life. He only saw the grainy figure on his secret video footage. He had his evidence. The case was closed. He turned and walked out of the bedroom without another word. He didn't slam the door. He just left, leaving me alone in the room that he had turned into a viewing theater for my failure. I know I'm the villain in his story. I get it. I broke our vows in the most fundamental way. I can't undo that, and I can't erase the pain I caused. But I also know that a marriage doesn't just shatter in one single moment. It cracks slowly over years of silence and missed connections. His story starts with the camera footage. Mine starts with the empty space on the couch next to me. He thinks the affair is what killed our marriage. I know it was already long dead. The affair was just the autopsy.